You didn't have a straw built into it?
My monitors aren't on.
Are you flying blind?
Is your monitor on?
Uh-huh. They're all, mine's the only one that's on. Milt's monitor is
Yeah,
off.
I did turn this one on.
All right, hi everyone. Let's see, do we have everyone? Chris, Ashley. I don't see Janelle, maybe she might be running late. And then I thought I saw Jim, there he is. Okay, so we have a fun-filled night stacked up for you. We'll go over the agenda real quick and then talk about how we'll proceed with this evening's festivities for number 2. And as I look over here, I'm looking towards Bob and Milt, so. Okay, so letter A, subdivision 20-59. Prelim and final plat for 6 buildable lots on Elmer Street. We are recommending approval. There hasn't been any opposition received, so we'll try for consent. Number 1, ZOA 20-2. That'll be the main event tonight. We will get back to that here in a minute, but we will be hearing it, obviously. Number 2, CP 20-53, an EMD sign on Emerald Street. We are recommending approval. No one has signed up in advance, and so we are going to try for consent. And so number A, or letter A and number 2 are the only consent items, hopefully tonight. Well, I hope more would be, but that we know of. Number 3, CR 20-15, PUD and variance and subdivisions on 33rd and Forsythia near Hill Road. It's a rezone PUD subdivision for 14 buildable townhomes or 14 buildable lots and 4 common lots. We have received some opposition, so we are planning to hear that one tonight. Number 4, CR 20-19, rezone from PCDD to C5 DDDA on State Street. We did receive some opposition, so we will be hearing that one tonight. Feel free to interrupt if you've got questions. Number 5 is an annexation, CR 20-16 on Eugene Lane. We do have some opposition on that one, so we will have to hear it. Number 6, CP 20-50 is a conditional use permit for a drive-up window on Fairview. We did receive some the applicant is opposed to some of our conditions, so we will be hearing that one tonight. We don't have anyone signed up at this time. Number 7, CUP 20-47 on Cole is a childcare facility that's actually been withdrawn, so we won't be hearing number 7. And there's no action needed on that one tonight.
I should probably note that when we start that item 7's been withdrawn.
Yep.
Okay.
Perfect. And then number 8, CUP 20-45 and CVA 20-63 on Victory Road is a conditional use permit for storage and a variance. We did receive some comments of opposition, and we will need to hear that one. So, any question on those items before we go through the lineup of how we'll run through tonight? Okay, so number 1, the zoning ordinance amendment for housing bonus ordinance. We have received quite a few comments in your packet and quite a few people signed up. To our knowledge, we have at least 6 neighborhood associations that are interested in speaking tonight. We have recommended that each of them take 5 minutes to speak. However, only 2 of them signed up in advance, so we might be hearing from less of them. So the idea is that when we start the hearing, we can see how many neighborhood associations are actually here, have them raise their hand, and then to see how many people are here and raise their hand, because I think we had 15 or so people sign up. We might have more that just show up online. And then we can see how many people we can expect. I'm guessing it could be easily 2 hours for this one item. So I think what we've discussed is that at the beginning of the hearing, we'll talk about that there's a very good likelihood that things could get deferred tonight. We will try our best, of course, to go through them, but we've had situations in the past where we've made deliberation and final decisions at 2 a.m. in the morning, and that's never a good feeling. And the weather the way it is too, for the few of us that are here at City Hall. So we'll make that statement right from the get-go that we could have deferrals. We might see if anyone is volunteering to defer, although I don't know if that'll happen. And then around 9 o'clock, we'll see how we're doing and if we're still on number 1 or if we've gotten through a couple of them and we can just maybe push through all of them. My guess is that we'll have to defer a couple items, but I'll be happy to be surprised and not defer anything either. So, any questions?
Mr. Chairman.
Milt.
So just to clarify, so our goal tonight or our purpose is going to be to do the consent, try and see if we can get A and 2 done on the consent agenda.
Yes.
That's step 1. Step 2 is we'll start hearing ZOA 2022. And we'll see how far we get. And if at 9 or 9:30, we're still working on ZOA 002, we might just pause the meeting briefly and just to sort of assess where we're at and how many more we think, if any, we might do. But we will finish ZOA 02 tonight is our goal.
That should be a good goal to make.
Okay,
Yeah.
All right. Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, Milt, please.
So just in case you want, I'd be happy to read into the record at the very beginning of the movie, the actual code language for review body deferral procedure, item 2, lack of quorum or lateness of hour. I'd be happy to read that into the record if you want. It basically says, Mr. Chairman, that if we make a specific finding that it's lateness of hour is applying, we can defer the rest of the agenda to our next meeting, right? And it doesn't really indicate that you need to go through all the consent procedures and all of that. So my reading of the code is we could just decide, discuss, and vote on that lateness of hour deferral to our next meeting.
That's correct. I believe Mary's on the line too. Mary, do you see any problems with that?
My apologies for that brief pause. Commissioners, I would agree, and what we've discussed or what we have settled on is that for the lateness of hour deferral, we do need to get through part of the agenda and use consideration of time and where we're at on the agenda as part of those findings. And so it would make more sense to take that pause that Celine was discussing at around the 9 o'clock hour to determine
Correct.
where we're at in the agenda at that time.
Correct. And Mr. Chairman, just for everyone's information, the way the city puts out the agenda now, there's a note at the bottom that says, it is at the discretion of the commission to not begin new business after 9:30. Remaining items will be deferred to the next scheduled hearing. So we have discretion to do that. I think that 9:30 number, because that's what we've sent out and it's in the public, I think we should abide by that. And, you know, as we get around that 9:30 number, we can have that conversation. That's all I
I
got.
think that's fair. I agree. Yeah. Everybody online? Does that sound like a good plan?
Works for me.
Or we could just hear the
Wait.
whole, it's Jim's last meeting. We could
I
just
was going
hear
to
the
say,
whole
we could all
agenda.
take this meeting over to Jim's house.
Not going to happen.
We're gonna get a motion to defer here in the next couple of minutes if we're not careful.
Chris, that beard is looking really good.
I think the flannel accentuates it.
Yeah, the flannel is,
No Shember has spilled into,
whoa.
no Shember has spilled into December.
Yeah, you're
Nice.
ready to go get my tree.
You don't have your tree yet?
Oh,
Bah humbug.
we're abiding by social distancing. Have you seen these tree stands? Packed.
Need to go to the woods, Milt.
What's that? Come
You need to
again?
go out, you need to go out in the woods.
What?
Get a
Why
tree
would I
permit.
You can borrow Chris's flannel.
Yeah. I even chopped it down with an axe I made myself. This is a DIY Christmas.
Yeah.
Boy.
Pandemic quick Christmas.
Yeah.
All right, so if we want to take a quick 2-minute break, last call for bathrooms,
Yep.
drinks.
Smoke them if you got them.
Okay. All right, everyone. Good evening and welcome to the Boise City Planning and Zoning Commission public hearing. A few things to start out for tonight's proceedings. Everyone from the public entering the hearing has been automatically muted and cannot speak. As the item you're interested in comes up for discussion, you'll be called upon and unmuted. There is a chat function in Zoom. This is not part of the record and should only be used if technical difficulties arise. If the chat function isn't available to you, you can email zoninginfo@cityofboise.org with any technical issues, or I will put the phone number to attend via phone in the chat as well. Our procedures for public hearings begin with a presentation from the planning team, then we'll go to the applicant and then the representative of the Registered Neighborhood Association or associations tonight. followed by questions from the commission. After that, we proceed to public hearing, starting with those starting with those in person, and then who signed up online in advance, and then anyone else who raises their hand virtually. If you are attending through your telephone, you can type in *9 to raise your hand. Each member of the public is allowed up to 3 minutes for testimony. We are strict with this time as it is limited in code. Finally, the applicant is allowed 5 minutes for rebuttal, after which the hearing will be closed and the commission will deliberate and render a decision. Tonight's agenda and proceedings might have a bit of a delay as we all navigate through the technology, so please be courteous and kind as we venture through this hybrid format. Mr. Chair, you have the floor.
Good evening, everyone. We are citizen volunteers appointed by the mayor and approved by the city council. We make final decisions on conditional use permits, variances, and appeals, and recommendations to the city council on subdivisions, rezones, annexations, and code or comprehensive plan amendments. Any decision made tonight may be appealed to the city council, provided that the appeal is filed within 10 days of this hearing. In order to file an appeal, you must have given written or oral testimony at tonight's meeting. So that's why it's important you give your name and address when you testify tonight. We utilize a consent agenda. This means that if the applicant agrees with the staff report and if there is no public opposition, the item will be placed on the consent agenda. All items that are placed on the consent agenda are approved with one motion without further public comment. For items not on the consent agenda, we will hold a full public hearing in the order just detailed a few minutes ago with staff, the applicant, the neighborhood association, and then the public testimony. Thank you all for virtually attending tonight. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Schaefer,
Here.
Squires,
Here.
Blanchard,
Here.
Moore,
Here.
Gillespie,
Here.
Bratnober.
Here.
6 present, 2 absent.
Okay, thank you very much. Got a pretty full plate this evening, everyone. So we're going to take care of a few housekeeping items up front. First of note, item number 7, that is CUP 20-47, Montessori School of Boise. That item has been withdrawn. And with that, we have a few items for inclusion into the consent agenda, or we'll try for the consent agenda. First, without objection, I'd like to place the minutes from our November 2nd and November 9th meetings on the consent agenda. And then we'll move right along to our first item. That's item A, which is eligible for the consent agenda. That's item A, SUB 20-59, Rodney Evans and Partners at 6222 West Elmer Street. It's a preliminary and final plat for a residential subdivision comprised of 6 buildable lots on 1.04 acres in an R1C zone. See, the applicant is online. Mr. Semple,
Yes.
have you had a chance to review the terms and conditions of the staff report?
Yes, we have, and we are in agreement with the staff report and the conditions of approval.
Terrific, very good. And is there anyone here this evening wishing to speak in opposition of this item? Okay, very good. With that, we will place item A on the consent agenda. The other item that's eligible for the consent agenda is item number 2. That is CUP 20-53 Apex Sign Company at 6500 West Emerald Street. This is a conditional use permit for an electronic message display. Is the applicant online with us?
Yes, I am.
Thank you, Mr. Lunsford. Have you had a chance to review the staff report, and are you in agreement with the terms and conditions?
Yes, I have, and I am in agreement with the staff report and the
Terrific.
conditions.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And is there anyone online this evening wishing to speak in opposition of this item? Okay, very good. We will put item number 2 on the consent agenda. The chair will entertain a motion. A motion for the consent agenda? Anyone? Anyone?
I'm squeezing them.
Oh, no.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Commissioner Ratnover.
Oh, okay. We were going to be waiting there all night. I move we place item A, SUV 20-59, and item number 2, CUP 20-53 on the consent agenda.
Second.
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Gillespie.
Jim, would you mind moving that we approve the agenda consisting of those two items?
So moved.
Very good. Do we have a second on that?
Second.
Very good. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Schaefer,
Aye.
Squires,
Aye.
Blanchard,
Aye.
Moore,
Aye.
Gillespie,
Aye.
Ratnober.
There's Letson.
Aye.
All in favor, motion carries.
Okay, very good. So with that, we will circle back around to item number 1. And actually, before we begin that item, I just want to make note for everyone in the audience this evening. We do have a quite lengthy agenda this evening. I'd like all parties to be aware of that. We're here to make sure we get everyone's comments heard, especially in regards to item number 1. I know we have a fair number of people that signed up in advance to speak on that item. So I just want to prepare some of our other applicants that may be later on the agenda that we could be getting into late hours this evening. And we may be looking at some deferrals to future meetings. So with that, we'll go ahead and kick this off with item number 1. That is ZOA 20-2, Planning and Development Services. This was deferred from November 9th, 2020 meeting. This is a zoning ordinance amendment to Boise City Code, Chapter 11-603.4. With that, we will hear from staff, and that is Andrea Tuning.
Chair, this is Leon Letson. I'll actually be leading this conversation initially, and Andrea will finish it up. So I'll get us started.
Very good. Thanks, Leon.
All right. Good evening, Chair and members of the Commission. The item before you is a zoning ordinance amendment to permit a housing bonus in exchange for assisting the city in its efforts to increase affordable housing, target areas for housing growth, and preserving existing buildings to expand housing supply. I'm Leon Letson, the Grower Housing Program Manager. The majority of the presentation, as I mentioned, will be led by Andrea Tuning. However, I would first like to explain how this ordinance fits within the city's broader efforts concerning housing and the Grower Housing Program. Next slide, please. Many of you are probably familiar with this graphic, but over the next 20 years, it's projected that Boise will grow by approximately 50,000 individuals, resulting in the need for 20,000 new housing units, or 1,000 units per year. Of those 1,000 units per year, I don't know what happened to our presentation there. Looks like it may have stopped. All right. Of those 1,000 units per year, 1 in 3 will need to be affordable or serving households making 80% of the area median income or below. Next slide. With this reality in mind, the city conducted a series of strategic planning sessions starting in February of 2018 to better understand the dynamics of housing in our community, including areas of opportunity, resident needs and gaps in our existing housing strategy, and to establish a vision for housing moving forward and the tools we need to achieve it. This effort, which included hours of discussion with members of the community and stakeholders, focused on housing, public meetings, and resident input through digital and social media channels, all resulted in the Grower Housing Program. With the election of Mayor McLean, the city has increased its efforts around housing, and the Grow Our Housing program has been folded into the comprehensive strategy known as A Home for Everyone. Next slide. Through the 4 strategic priorities listed here, the Grow Our Housing program seeks to address housing needs in our community by providing a variety of housing and creating compact, dynamic neighborhoods with walkable streets and access to jobs, services, and amenities. The Housing Bonus Ordinance is one tool under maximized land use allowances aimed at increasing housing supply through zoning and development standards to improve housing affordability, options, and choice for people at all income levels. The Housing Bonus Ordinance is a tool where we've shop worked with the community in the series of outreach efforts I mentioned above. And with that, I'll hand it over to Andrea to share the remainder of the presentation. I'll also be available for any questions at the end. Thank you.
Good evening. For the record, my name is Andrea Tuning and I'm with the city's comprehensive plan division. We are here this evening to talk about the zoning ordinance amendment. And as Leon had pointed out earlier, this particular zoning ordinance amendment falls under the Grow Our Housing Maximize Land Use Allowances strategies. The Housing Bonus Amendment is actually the second amendment that the city has done under this particular initiative. The first occurred in 2019 with the Accessory Dwelling Unit Amendment. This evening, we are looking for the proposed Housing Bonus Ordinance, which is a new section within our residential use standards that's intended to increase and diverse housing options, specifically by increasing the number of affordable housing units, providing housing in strategic areas, as well as preserving existing buildings throughout the city of Boise. We are going to be taking a look at the 3 types of base bonuses that are offered. First, we have affordable housing. Second is activity center. And the third is adaptive reuse. Each one of these base bonuses does offer a variety of incentives. A number of those incentives include flexibility regarding density, additional building height, the ability to receive a parking reduction, as well as a streamlined review process if certain criteria are met. I'm going to do a brief tutorial about each one of the available bonuses to kind of explain how they work. With the affordable housing bonus, we do get a public benefit of getting 10, 15, or 20% of the proposed housing income, or the proposed housing being income restricted. And the incentive that we can offer to get that public benefit is offering a streamlined process, that flexibility in density, additional building height in the office, as well as commercial zones. However, it is restricted in the R3 zone, as well as a parking reduction. When we talk about the affordable housing unit, I think it's appropriate for us to take a look at what does that really mean. So we are specifically targeting populations that meet 80% to 100% of area median income. So a household size of 1 individual qualifying under the 80% of AMI, if they were to pay 30% of their income, that would be $1,047.50 monthly. We have noted the various household size, the yearly income, as well as the rent that would be applicable for both 80% and 100% of that area median income. It's important to note that the Housing Bonus Ordinance is only targeting one specific population. As we noted before, it's the 80 to 100% of AMI. We do have a number of other strategies that fall within our Grow Our Housing program that are targeting those lower AMI populations, which would include 80% and below. We have the Housing Land Trust, the Housing Incentive Program, as well as our coordination of public and private resources. When we take a look at the affordable housing bonus and the applicable zones, we do have the R3 as the lone residential zone. It was originally included with the R2 zone, but that has since been removed. All of our office zones and all of our commercial zones. If you note, it's 10.69% of our total land area. And if you take a look at all of the applicable zones, you notice that it is citywide and it traditionally follows our major corridors, including State Street, Fairview, Overland, Orchard, Vista, Broadway, as well as Federal Way. It was important for us to protect our existing residential neighbors. So to do that, we have required a transition in height for the additional floor area that would be allowed. So when we talk about the additional height that would be allowed, if the public benefit is provided, we would allow for one additional floor to be constructed. That would take a height from 45 feet to 55 feet. However, it would require that top story to step in and provide an additional 10-foot setback above and beyond that base setback. So we do have a depiction on the left, which shows this is what would traditionally be allowed in, say, an R3 zone. And then if we were to go ahead and look at what that would look like if there was an additional floor area on top of that. This particular one takes a look at the C2D zone. Some people had major concerns saying, hey, why would the city allow for unlimited density to occur? That simply isn't the case. What happens is that sites are still required to provide on-site parking, and they do have applicable setbacks. So when we take a look at the 50-foot wide lot, we do have the potential to provide a total of 4 parking spaces. That would be 3 traditional and 1 van accessible space. And when we look at the 100-foot wide lot, we are able to provide 10 vehicle parking spaces, assuming it's alley loaded. Or if we were looking at on-street parking, we would have 4 on-street parking spaces. When we evaluate the activity center supportive bonus, the public benefit is actually getting housing located near our activity centers. So if a project is in 1/8 of a mile of a community activity center, they would be eligible for a bonus, or 1/4 of a mile from a regional activity center. Applicable zones would be the R3 zone, all of our office and commercial zones, and the incentive that we can provide is density flexibility, the potential for additional building height, with the exception of the R3, it's not applicable in the R3 zone, as well as a parking reduction. When we take a look at how that land area is distributed throughout the city of Boise, you can see all of our regional and community activity centers as they're located throughout the city. This land area is much smaller, but it is targeted areas to get individuals close to their goods, services, and employment areas. You'll also note that many of these nodes are located on our transit lines that are key to the city's transportation system. Again, we have the same transition to the existing residential neighborhoods. So if a project is next to a residential zone and it has a single family or a duplex, we do require that 10 additional feet of setback, providing that tiered effect for the building to preserve privacy and shading. Our final and third bonus option is for the adaptive reuse. This is specifically for the reuse of an existing primary structure. So if we have a structure that is not traditionally utilized for a residential use, it could convert into a residential use. Or if we do have a residential use that would like to convert into additional residential uses, that would be allowed. As you'll notice, there's a number of additional applicable zones that qualify under the adaptive reuse. And the one incentive that's offered is the parking reduction. When we take a look at the land area distributed through the city of Boise, again, you'll notice that it's predominantly throughout the entire city. The total land area is 55.7% of the city's land area, and that seems significant. However, you'll want to remember that these will be buildings that will be converted from one use to a residential use. That drops the percentage significantly. Unfortunately, we do not have the capability to determine exactly how much land area that is. We do have options that allow individuals to combine bonuses as well. So you'll notice that the affordable housing and transit supportive bonuses can be combined, as well as the affordable housing with the adaptive reuse. That allows the individual to stack those bonuses. Ultimately, the maximum benefit that they would get would be a 30% parking reduction, the possibility of a streamlined process, that density flexibility, and in certain zones, specifically the office and commercial zones, additional building height. In September, when we submitted our application, we actually created a website for individuals to seek additional information and provide information in regard to a public survey. We have received a number of public survey responses. We've gotten written correspondence, telephone calls, as well as conference calls. All of that information has been provided within the packet. And it's important to realize that what we heard was most respondents agreed that housing affordability is a major concern within the city of Boise, and most respondents were supportive of housing in targeted areas. All of our public supporters said, we love it, we need additional housing, and many said we didn't go far enough. They wanted us to apply additional zones and actually not even reduce the R2 zone from the entire package. They also asked us to reduce parking further and asked us to reduce the term of 30 years for those affordable units. Some sought 5 years, some 10, and some 20. But the ultimate goal was to reduce that term. We also heard a significant amount of public opposition. That opposition was in regard to additional building height being allowed. A number of individuals pointed out that a 30-year term for affordable units was too short. There was concerns about the ability to streamline the process. There was a desire for words and criteria to be clarified. And there was a number of individuals that had also expressed that there was concern that this housing bonus ordinance was being completed ahead of the zoning code rewrite. So that brings us to a natural question. Why isn't the housing bonus a part of the zoning code rewrite? The zoning code rewrite is a 2 to 3 year process that will evaluate the code in its entirety to create a user-friendly document that aligns with our Boise City Comprehensive Plan. The housing bonus ordinance and zoning code rewrite are actually two very separate projects. The housing bonus ordinance is an interim strategy aimed at supporting urgent housing needs in our community. It is something our leadership team is committed to accomplishing. This doesn't mean that it does not mean that the zoning code rewrite will not reevaluate this code as part of the rewrite. In fact, we know for a fact that it will. The process will take an in-depth look at housing across all facets. The housing bonus ordinance as proposed simply gives us the opportunity to start a plan of action early before more individuals become overburdened by housing costs. It allows us the ability to evaluate the process and refine the ordinance further to effectively create housing affordability and housing options for people of all ages, income levels, household sizes, and cultural backgrounds. Ultimately, it will help us create a home for everyone. We did propose a number of changes and modifications to the ordinance, which you should have in your packet. I wanted to just kind of walk us through each one of those so that there's an understanding of what occurred from the original proposal to what is being proposed at this point as a recommendation to the Planning and Zoning Commission. These changes were specifically made based on the public feedback that we received. The first change includes renaming the Transit Supportive Ordinance to be called the Activity Center Supportive Bonus Ordinance. We agreed that Activity Center was a more appropriate name. We removed the R2 zone from an applicable zone within the affordable bonus. We also added the pedestrian commercial zone to an applicable zone for the affordable housing bonus, as well as the activity center supportive bonus. We clarified that adaptive reuse bonus is for primary structures only. We removed the height incentive for the R3 zone for affordable housing, as well as activity center supportive. We lowered the unit count that was available for administrative review in the R3 zone. We moved from 50 units to 25 instead. We removed the incentive to increase allowable height by 20 feet by preserving 50% of our existing affordable units. This was very concerning to a number of individuals and was very confusing, so we eliminated it altogether. We wanted to ensure that rents paid did not exceed that 30% of area median income based on household size, so we adjusted accordingly. We defined the term adjacent, and we also clarified how distances from the activity centers would be measured. Now we get to the important stuff, which is that criteria for approval. We actually have two findings that we need to make this evening. The first is that it complies with and conforms to the comprehensive plan. And our second legal finding is that it's required for public convenience or welfare. So we're going to go ahead and start with the comprehensive plan. The comprehensive plan has several key guiding principles. The housing bonus ordinance that's being presented this evening ultimately touches on each one of these guiding principles in one way or another. And as we talk about it more specifically, we'll actually talk about some of those goals, policies, and principles. When we look at policy PDP 1.2, it talks about encouraging the production of housing and mixed-use development in infill priority areas. And it also allows incentives to be utilized to provide density, height, a streamlined process, and also for targeted areas. Goal NAC7 specifically facilitates an integrated mixed-use housing types and price ranges for all neighborhoods. We also have specific policies and goals that talk about allowing a mixture of housing types and densities by right in certain areas. Also, again, providing those incentives such as density bonuses and other zoning tools. Assisting for the provision of housing for low and moderate income households. Encouraging an adequate supply of housing that will be appropriate and will apply to varying financial capabilities. When we talk about activity center supportive, it talks about encouraging high density residential development as part of new activity centers, as well as revitalizing some of those existing ones and promoting compact walkable development patterns that support transit and reduce carbon emissions. It also supports getting us away from auto-oriented uses. Finally, when we talk about adaptive reuse, our comprehensive plan specifically discusses the ability to reduce the amount of solid waste being landfilled, promoting the adaptive reuse of historic buildings, encouraging the maintenance and rehabilitation of our existing housing stock, and really protecting the housing that we have. Our last finding is critical. We have to determine, is this required for public convenience and general welfare? Indeed, this amendment is necessary for the public convenience and general welfare to effectively and substantially increase the number of our housing options and provide equitable access to safe housing, transportation, employment opportunities, as well as a healthy environment. We would like to propose one modification to you. Within your packet on page 15 and 31, we had missed one specific area where we continued to call it transit supportive bonus. That should actually be removed and replaced with activity center supportive. With that, I think we can safely say that we are recommending the Planning and Zoning Commission approve the housing bonus ordinance based on the findings within the project report, with the addition of the modification to change the term transit supportive to activity center supportive, which is noted on pages 15 and 31. Now I am available for any questions that you might have. And we also have Leon Letson, who stayed online, and he can talk about how this translates to the Grower Housing Initiative further, if you have any questions in regard to that.
Okay, thanks, Andrea, and thanks, Leon. Let me see, do that. Okay. We'll hold for questions here for a minute. First, we're going to reach out to our neighborhood associations and hear from them, and then we'll circle back on questions. So given the scope of this amendment, we have several neighborhood associations that have signed up in advance to speak. I have the Northwest Neighborhood Association and the West End. I believe they're both in attendance. In addition to that, we had 4 or 5 others: the East End, the Southeast, West Downtown, Vista, and Centennial. So if there are representatives from all of those neighborhood associations online, could you please raise your hands virtually? Very good. Excellent. Okay. Thank you for that. We're going to go ahead and we'll hear from each of you. And we'd like to start out with 5 minutes for each neighborhood association. And as you guys all begin, of course, please start with your name and address for the record. We'll go ahead and start with the Northwest Neighborhood Association. That's Richard Llewellyn.
Can you hear me?
We can. Good evening, Richard.
Thank you. I prepared comments for 10 minutes. I guess I can just go and hack out paragraphs as I go along. What would you suggest?
I think we're okay with, are we good with 10? Yeah, well, do your thing. We'll do 10. That's fine.
Okay, I'll try it. I'll try to keep as short as I can here without talking too fast. Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Real quick for the record, for the other groups, we can all have 10 minutes as well, since we'll start out with 10 for you. And then Richard, go ahead and start with your name and address, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Richard Llewellyn, 9170 Hill Road. Commissioners, first of all, as a neighborhood that was annexed without our consent into a land use map that we did not participate in creating, we will confirm that the lack of incorporating detailed public knowledge from our residents into land use decisions has had lasting negative consequences. Let's be clear, streamlining the process means shutting us out and our knowledge. The relatively mild controversy generated by unpopular development applications is far more healthy than building resentment. And Boise, with a highly skewed geographic political representation, is vulnerable to building resentment. Equally important is that by engaging the public and even listening to them, the public may listen back. Our neighborhood had adamantly opposed any more dense building along State Street. But as we have learned more, we now support transit-oriented development as long as it is done right. Controversy can lead to better understanding. We have tried to understand how this housing bonus ordinance will lead to building more affordable housing. The short answer is that it will not in our neighborhood and not in most of the targeted zoning districts, because the threshold rent of 100% AMI is already above the going market rate. Almost everyone now recognizes that building more at the market rate has no impact on creating affordable housing. Even worse, it is likely to lead to speculation and redevelopment of existing affordable housing, such as manufactured home parks. The move to strike R2 from the proposal will help to avoid displacement, but nonetheless, the amendment is likely to exacerbate the crisis rather than reduce it. The ordinance, I should say. We need to be very clear that in most parts of the city, the 80% AMI option will never be considered, simply because the 100% option will be met simply by building market rate housing. Let me repeat that. The 80% AMI will not be used. Only building the going market rate housing will be further encouraged. This proposal is not designed to build any more affordable housing than already is being built. A 60% threshold would, on the other hand, at least mitigate the displacement created by the bonus and would allow at least the essential workers needed to maintain these large new buildings to live nearby. 60% AMI is barely affordable to someone making twice the minimum wage. That's about $30,000 a year. Building a handful of units at 60% AMI will not solve our affordable housing crisis, but it is an incremental step in the right rather than wrong direction. The newly added 130% AMI limit may have unintended consequences. It would seem to further channel development into what investors so clearly favor today, the so-called giant box homogeneous apartment complexes. But let's not make the mistake of assuming what is favored today will be needed tomorrow. We may want a more healthy variation of price points within a project, but with this rule, an expensive penthouse could not be built with more modest units that would otherwise qualify. Moreover, this rule would preempt much adaptive reuse, especially a mixture of owner-occupied and rental units at multiple price points. Today's typical multifamily construction is not up to standards that supports what were traditionally known as condos, but this could and should change. However, the 130% rule makes selling individual units as condos even more difficult, as it would confine the individual owner to those rent threshold restrictions. When confronted with the complexities and vagaries of investors, speculators, construction costs, and external demands, it is often best to realize that all we may be able to affect is building the best city we can on a parcel-by-parcel basis, rather than hope that by enabling some grand design, the market will solve our problems for us. The best laid plans of mice and men oft do go astray. A 60% AMI threshold was also the original plan from city staff last July, before it was advised against by consultants. It is critical that those of us who know Boise stand up to the pressure to take away the stronger position that could actually make a difference and move us in the right direction. That brings us to the topic of power, your power as city officials to shape development toward the public interest. We all should know that Idaho is a strong property law state and largely a Dillon rule state, and the courts have ruled against cities when they attempt to uphold their comprehensive plans. We have all witnessed the developer attorney threaten lawsuits if you cite Blueprint Boise in a decision unfavorable to their clients. Some of you as commissioners have even told us that it is useless to cite Blueprint Boise at a public hearing because the plan is typically not backed by enforceable ordinance, even though LUPA clearly states that land use decisions shall not be in conflict with a comprehensive plan. Nonetheless, we tend to operate with a belief that the power of our elected leaders and appointed officials here in Idaho are extremely limited. But one strong power that you do have is the ability to enforce and maintain the zoning ordinance. A property owner in Idaho simply has no legal expectation to a rezone for the higher densities that will make a developer greater profits. You can and have used this power to exact public benefits in exchange for rezones. Boise, by its own ordinance, states that rezones must be in the public interest. Of course, there are limits to any successful negotiation, but this power to negotiate is forfeited once developers are entitled to higher densities by right. The ability to craft a beneficial developer agreement with a rezone will also largely be lost in the targeted districts. You may not be able to hear from us where a traditional pathway exists, for example, or needed open space, or where the neighborhood party tree is threatened. You will no longer be able to negotiate for these benefits on our behalf. We might foresee some of these site-specific issues with design standards. That is a difficult task we have yet to seriously undertake. It is also unclear whether the city will still have the ability to attach a developer agreement onto a rezone into one of the targeted districts, if it limits any of the bonuses of increased densities, increased heights, or reduced parking, either directly or indirectly. We have yet to make the investment in a serious study of the housing bonus ordinance impacts on housing affordability and what the expected stresses and costs will be to our infrastructure. The ordinance severely curtails public participation and the ability of the city to respond to the public's concerns on a contextual basis, and yet it does not achieve anything that cannot already be achieved with the current requirements of hearings. This is not a beneficial trade-off, and is most likely to accelerate the building of homogeneous market rate apartments that may satisfy Wall Street today, but impoverish our city of tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Okay, next we'll hear from, I think Jason Durand is online from the West End Neighborhood Association.
Hello? Hello?
Good evening, Mr. Durand. Yes, we can hear you.
Hey, my name is Jason Durand. I'm representing the West End Neighborhood Association, 2517 West Jefferson, Boise.
Great, thank you.
Okay.
You have 10 minutes.
Okay, I guess to start with that, West Neighborhood Association acknowledges the circumstances and reasoning that led to the city of Boise to pursue and propose this, but we can't support it as it's written. Mostly we have concerns with the by right or administrative approval of the large projects in the R3 zone. And we also believe that this coupled with the fact that most of the bonuses go specifically to the already high intensity zones just serve to sort of increase this kind of development that attracts the most opposition at P&Z and City Hall. So we understand development happens and we're not a stranger to it. In our neighborhood, we've seen a lot of it in many years, and a lot of it is relatively uncontroversial. It's just a certain type of development that typically becomes very controversial, and those usually are the ones that approach the density limits or the height limits in certain ways that are, disrespectful, I guess, of the context and where it is. And we have in the past used the public hearing process, and it's played a very critical role in getting results, that the neighborhood can live with and the developer can live with, and projects can get approved. So mostly the removal of that public hearing process for 20, units that are fewer than 25 units in R3, and that is probably the most concerning part for the West End Neighborhood Association. Overall, we appreciate the goal of this ordinance, but we think, as proposed, it's short-sighted and probably prone to create a lot of conflict. So yeah, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Durand. We appreciate it. Okay, and let's see, I think we have, next we'll hear from, I think I saw Sheila Grisham. Oh, now she gone. We'll go ahead and move right along to Eric Berg, who's representing the Southeast Neighborhood Association.
Mr. Chair, I believe Sheila's online. I was changing her from attendee to panelist.
Oh, okay. I
Just in case
apologize.
folks want to share their video.
I apologize. Okay, let's go ahead and hear from Sheila first. I apologize, Mr. Berg. You can sit tight for a few minutes, please, and we'll hear from Sheila Grisham from the East End Neighborhood Association first.
Hi, this is Sheila. Can you hear me?
You can. Good evening, Sheila.
Hi. Good evening, commissioners. My name is Sheila Grisham. I live at 1204 East State Street, Boise, 83712. Tonight, I am speaking on behalf of the East End Neighborhood Association regarding the housing bonus ordinance. Ina had submitted testimony by email opposing the ordinance. Since then, a few board members have heard Andrea Tuning talk about the changes that have been made to the ordinance. We want to thank you all for listening to the neighborhood associations and Boise residents about their concerns and frustration and making changes to the ordinance. I also want to thank Andrea Tuning for being available to talk via Zoom and email. She's been very patient and has answered so many questions, and we really appreciate her help. The concerns we still have is the lack of process. No matter the size or zoning, the process should still hold true. All neighborhood associations and residents should have an opportunity to participate in public process. Many of the neighborhood associations have either finished and adopted their neighborhood plans, or they are in the process of writing them. There is a lot of work that goes into these plans. There is neighborhood outreach, neighborhood input, and voting before the neighborhood associations can go before a city council to have the plans adopted into Blueprint Boise. These plans hold the map of what the residents want and hope to see in the future as their neighborhood grows. And so yes, they should always have a say in the process when new proposals come up. The East End understands that we need to absorb a percentage of the growth and that Boise needs affordable housing in Boise. But we also want to be sure that the growth that takes place is something that complements and is congruent with what we already have in our neighborhoods. Thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you, Sheila. Okay, next we have Eric Berg from the Southeast Neighborhood Association.
Commissioners, thank you. As important as the end result is, so often the journey is just as important.
Can I interrupt real quick and get your name and address, please, for the record?
I'm sorry.
Thank you.
1301 South Grant, Eric Berg, President, Southeast Neighborhood Association.
Guy's got great hair.
Appreciate it. As important as the end result is, so often the journey is just as important. While CENA feels the end result that we are at now in the revised ordinance is a vast improvement, we also feel that the process needs to be improved so that we can get even better results in the future. CENA voted in October to oppose the original ordinance, based mainly on our worries about the effect on the R2 zone and the possible, there was no limit in the density in the original drafting, and also the expedited process this ordinance went through. First of all, we're incredibly thankful for the reception and willingness of staff to listen to the neighborhood with our concerns in terms of removing the R2 zone from the affordable housing bonus part of this, and also lowering the expedited process to 25 units. We believe this ordinance is better for these changes, and I really can't thank Andrea enough for the time and effort she gave to neighborhoods to hear our concerns. She really went above and beyond, and we appreciate that so much. We do have some concerns still about historic preservation in the R3 zone when it comes to this ordinance, but we do note that this is something that could be solved through the demolition ordinance, among other things that are currently working their way through the system. In the future, we would really like to work with the city on the front side of these issues than having to play catch up. I did participate in the brainstorming sessions and really appreciated those, and I think that was helpful. But getting the neighborhood associations in on the drafting side is also very important. The staff was fantastic in working with us once we sounded the alarm of things that we thought would be extraordinarily detrimental to the city. And we have some alternatives that we think that could provide for greater housing affordability, such as the missing middle, that would be compatible with R1 and R2 that wasn't really part of this, but might be part of future ordinances, or other areas that we'd love to work with the city on. However, we need to be working together early on. It was the scope and the breadth of this ordinance that caught us off guard. And bringing in neighborhood associations from the get-go into the drafting process, in addition to the brainstorming process that we were a part of, before these ordinances are even submitted to planning and zoning, would make for much better ordinances, both for the neighborhood and the noble and vital goals of these ordinances. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Berg. Okay, just real quick, I want to make sure we don't have any other neighborhood associations online that want to testify this evening. Okay, we have one hand up from Nicole Windsor. Nicole, I assume you want to represent the West Downtown Neighborhood Association. Is that right?
Hello, I would like to testify on behalf of the West Downtown Neighborhood Association.
Okay.
My address is 1810 West Jefferson Street, Boise, Idaho. We submitted a letter also with some concerns. We do appreciate some of the amendments that have been made, but as other neighborhood associations have mentioned, we do still have a couple concerns. Our neighborhood contains C2, PC, and R3 zoning, which would be impacted by this code update. And we do have our concerns center around the streamlined administrative process. In our opinion, it kind of takes away the opportunity for interaction between the residents, the neighborhood, and the developer as we go through this process. Our neighborhood has utilized the public hearing process quite often as projects have come through. We've utilized it both to commend projects that we think are good, and then we've also used it to flag projects that we think need some adjustments to fit into the neighborhood. We recently adopted a neighborhood plan by having the streamlined administrative process. We worry that we will not be able to utilize our neighborhood plan to the full extent by being able to have the interaction, whether it be through the through the typical process of the notification to the neighborhood and meetings and such, and then subsequently the public hearing. We worry that we will not be able to utilize that plan and that the city funded in order to reference some things that we thought would be a good way to continue to grow our neighborhood. Also, by allowing this, by having the standard process where neighborhoods can interact with the developer and have public hearing process, we feel that it also helps build a relationship. And we've had some instances where we haven't had good interaction to start with, but then through kind of having to have the public process, we have been able to build a relationship, and the developer has been able to understand what the neighborhood is interested in. The neighborhood can also understand what the goals are of the developer. By taking this away, it just seems to leave people wondering and guessing and then assuming, which is never a good thing when new things are coming into your neighborhood. We like to have transparency, and we feel that the best way to do that is to maintain the public process. Thank you. Appreciate the time this evening.
Thank you, Ms. Windsor. Okay. One more call. Any other neighborhood associations that would like to testify this evening? Okay. Seeing no more hands raised, we'll go ahead and bring this item back to the commission for questions of the applicant or staff.
Madam Chairman, or excuse me, Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Gillespie.
It's been so long with Madam.
It has been a while.
So this is a question for Andrea and Leon. So referring to the actual proposed language, section C called approval procedure, the last sentence in the packet page 62 says any conditions attached to a project approval shall not reduce or modify the housing bonuses for which the project qualifies under this section. So my question is, does that sentence apply to rezones in any development agreement that we would like to require with a rezone application?
Commissioner Gillespie, to answer that, the rezone process is a process that is completely separate from this particular one. So if a project does come through requesting a rezone and there's a development agreement attached to it, that could still remain in place. What that particular section is saying is that if there is an entitlement through the housing bonus ordinance for additional units, we cannot reduce them through other means other than our traditional design review standards and guidelines that would be applicable to all developments.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So Andrea, just let me give you an example and you tell me how that shakes out. So someone owns a piece of property, let's say it's R2. So as currently envisioned, it's not part of this code amendment. But they come to the city and they ask for a rezone to R3. Can the city, this commission, the council, looking at the particular details of that parcel, its location, its placement, et cetera, can we, as part of that rezone, that CAR, could we limit either the density or the height in a development agreement of that parcel as it becomes a new R3 parcel?
Commissioner Gillespie, yes, you could. Because the rezone process is a separate process altogether, there are legal findings attached to that are separate and unique from the housing bonus ordinance.
So, Mr. Chairman, so just so that everybody's clear, so that means that any conditions that are in a conditional use permit, or I'm trying to think what else, a variance request, et cetera, what we typically think of is where there's a project or an applicant, we cannot, in those sorts of permit applications, restrict these bonuses. Is that correct?
I'm happy to take a shot at that if that's helpful, Andrea.
Go ahead, Leah.
Perfect. My internet seems to be a little goofy.
You're good.
Well, I think back to Chairman Commissioner Gillespie. Sorry, I always forget the proper procedures here. I think Andrea's original answer answers that question, and that with the development agreement, you can restrict unit count, density, height, setbacks, and so forth. I guess what you're saying is if a property is rezoned, there's a development agreement, and the housing bonus ordinance isn't anticipated on that property, and there's somehow wiggle room within the plans provided to allow for additional density, then theoretically that could happen. But we're so specific in our development agreements when it comes to elevations, site plans, unit counts, that I don't think that's going to happen. And I think it's on the planners moving forward to obviously be aware of the ordinance out there that exists, and when we're requesting zones that this ordinance could be applied to, I think that conversation will need to occur with staff and with the commission moving forward.
Right. So, Mr. Chairman,
please.
So one idea for you guys then would be to add a little clarifying language, because I agree with how you guys are interpreting it. That the conditions that we're talking about in that sentence would really come about as a result of a subdivision, a planned unit development, a variance, a request to modify one of those, right? So there's a limited set of permits and the associated conditions on those permits that we're essentially restricting what they can do, if that makes sense.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Gillespie, that is correct. And as you had recommended that, hey, we may need to make some minor modifications, I just want to remind the commission that that is a possibility. You ultimately have the option to approve it as proposed this evening. You could recommend to the city council that they deny it as it's been proposed, or you can recommend modifications that you think it might make it better suited to the city of Boise. So you've got multiple options on your plate.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll let other people take a crack. I've got a growing list here.
Okay, sounds good, Milt. Anyone else?
Mr. Chair,
Commissioner Squires?
this is a question for staff. And first of all, thank you all so much for putting this together. I know this is a really important effort for our community. So, sorry, I've written some notes, so I just want to make sure I hit everything. So regarding the administrative review, I noticed that the city's consultant recommended this aspect in August of this year to the city council. Can you please speak to this conversation between the city council and the consultant? And did the consultant discuss any real world examples where this is successful or where it has failed? And what are the bumper rails? I'd just like to have a little bit better understanding of how you all arrived at this decision to make this recommendation.
Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Squires, originally we worked with our consultants to create ultimately an administrative process for developments. That not only came from our consultants, but it originally derived from our comprehensive plan. So there are a couple of policies and goals that are in our comprehensive plan, specifically PDP 1.2 and NAC 7.3, which specifically talk about the city incentivizing these things, allowing development to occur by right, and really focusing on specific objective criteria to make evaluations for all development proposals. So you are correct. We did visit with the Boise City Council initially to hear what they wanted to be folded into an incentive program. And then we revisited with them on 2 separate occasions to make sure that we were on the right track. So they were extremely supportive of us allowing for the streamlined development process.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Follow up, please.
Please.
So with this administrative process, I assume it's going to be like the other administrative processes where these may be appealed to the Planning and Zoning Commission and ultimately City Council. Am I correct in that assumption?
That is correct. So the streamlined process would have the same objective criteria. It would just be in a different venue. So rather than a public hearing, it would be done in the office at City Hall. And everybody would still have access to the appeal process. And ultimately, it would go to the Design Review Committee first, the Planning and Zoning Commission, followed by City Council. So it would be a multi-tiered approach.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I have a couple more questions, if that's okay.
Yeah, please proceed.
While I understand that anything below the 80% AMI may be targeted through some other programs, and I think that's wonderful, can you talk to me about why the city isn't incentivizing below the 80% AMI through this ordinance, and what would be the harm? Please educate me on that.
So, Chairman, Mr. Chair, Commissioner Squires, ultimately we arrived at the 80% and the 100% specifically based on comments we've received from City Council saying, hey, there are people that live on the edge and that are cost burdened. Those individuals need assistance as well. So that was one portion of it. But the other portion is what ultimately happens is when a developer does have an income restricted unit, they don't get to make up additional funds through government subsidies or other types of low income housing.
Oh, there she went. Oh, there she.
Oh, she's back.
I'm back.
Going.
You
So
are.
when they don't receive those subsidies, there's actually a loss that comes with each one of those units. And so once you start to reduce that percentage further and further, that essentially discourages developers from providing those affordable units. And so there's a delicate balance of providing them enough incentive in order to be able to accommodate for those types of units so that we can really get that diverse population in those neighborhoods that we're looking for.
Okay, thank you.
Squires?
Yes.
Can I just jump in on your question and ask one of my own that's related to that?
Of course.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So Andrea, there was a really good, I thought, thoughtful piece by Lori DeCare in our comment package that talked about this 80% threshold and the way that the AMI is calculated, which is kind of a citywide number or maybe even broader. And she's basically saying, and I think Richard Llewellyn in his comment too, talked about, you know, in large parts of the city, the average income, you know, it's not reflected in the citywide average. And that in fact, you know, 80%, that number, when applied to that big income number, is already above market in a lot of parts of the city. And I don't know if you saw that comment, but that spoke to the difficulty of sort of, you know, trying to look at a very complex population and develop the right number. Because I think what Lori and Richard are basically saying is that in some parts of the city, you know, we might need to be more, we'd be more aggressive. The 60% would be a better market versus market rate fit. So how should we think about that just from a policy point of view, dealing with that?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Gillespie, you know, we really evaluated it quite well. We wanted to utilize some type of formula or definition that was widely adopted, which is how we got to the AMIs that are created by HUD. And then really focusing, as I had stated before, on, hey, we've got a lot of people on those brinks, and some units, yes, they are below that 100% or 80% of AMI calculation. However, there are a number of units, especially the newer units that are coming into the city that are not. And we have also been able to watch our real estate market. Numbers are increasing as far as rents, as well as pricing for households. Those numbers continue to increase, and we may see the point where a number of those then jump above what that 80% and that 100% of AMI currently state. So we're really focusing on that target population, knowing that we have other programs that specifically target that 80% and below.
Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, Commissioner Gillespie.
So just to, I think, follow up where Ashley and myself. So it's the city's view that this ordinance actually has some bite, that it actually will create, you know, somewhat more affordable below market rate housing in certain parts of the city. That's the city's view.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Gillespie.
Oh, there she goes.
Oh. What was she going to say, Leon?
I have something to add when she's done, but I want to hear her thoughts first, obviously.
I'm back.
Go ahead, Andrea.
So you are correct. However, I think it's also important that we reiterate the fact that this is an interim ordinance, which is going to give us a valuable tool and an opportunity to evaluate and do additional research. What is working? What is not? How do we need to evaluate this further to make sure that our incentives are effective? So this is a really great opportunity for us to take a step forward and further evaluate. So if that 80% really isn't working, we have the ability to change it through the zoning code rewrite.
Chairman, I'd love to add on to that just real quick. As the grower housing program manager, you know, the whole universe of housing is kind of where I spend my day. And as Andrea's mentioned, and as Commissioner Squires pointed out, you know, there are other programs at play in our community, some led by the city, some led by other agencies in the area, such as Boise Housing Authority, LADA, some at the state level, and some ultimately at the federal level. So how I look at this ordinance personally, how I've come to grips with what it's doing again within that universe of housing, is that we are incentivizing the private developer, and in doing so, you know, there's the the least amount they're getting back. I mean, I know that's going to be debated here a bit tonight, but when you actually start putting units on a site and you start figuring out how to park them and fit within those dimensional standards, it gets challenging to actually build a lot more units. So this is kind of a low-hanging fruit option for people to figure out how to maybe integrate 1 or 2 units into a project where, as before, they wouldn't be able to do that. And again, all the other city programs like the Housing Incentives Program is targeting 80% and below and really focused on 50 and 30%. That's where we plan to award the most money and try to get the most done with that program. The Housing Land Trust program is a site-by-site consideration of what we need in that neighborhood from an AMI or a household income perspective, and what best fits the community. So I think we need to consider all those things and recognize that this is an opt-in ordinance for developers looking to create housing in our community. And so those terms of affordability, frankly, are the most attractive when you start considering pro formas and financial performance of a project. It just, to ask for bigger cuts really makes it an unattractive ordinance for a lot of people to consider. And that's where those other programs need to step in and do some of that heavy lifting. So.
Very good. Thank you for that. Okay, I think we'll go back to Commissioner Squires. I think she had a few more follow-up questions, if I remember correctly.
I do. Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. Just 2 more questions. The first question is, through the outreach process, and I understand you all are very limited with COVID, and this is just an incredibly challenging year. But did you all take the opportunity to try to reach out specifically to the rental community and try to get as much feedback, from their point of view as possible?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Squires, our outreach effort has been unique because of COVID specifically. We did have the website available. We reached out to a number of known low-income housing providers. We also reached out to a number of individuals that had expressed an interest in maybe heading that way, but they weren't interested in large developments. And then we also heard from a number of developers contact us saying, how could this help us? How would this apply to us? And I think you're going to hear from some of those individuals later this evening.
Thank you. And last question. I read a couple of comments and I think it was the Easton Neighborhood Association talking about their neighborhood plan. Do you foresee any conflicts with the adopted neighborhood plans? I know you all went through a very extensive process with many of these associations. Is there the capability for conflict? And if so, how do you plan to resolve that?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Squires, we did evaluate that as well. So our neighborhood plans are adopted plans within our comprehensive plan, and we will always refer to those specific documents. The majority of our plans specifically don't discuss parking reductions, incentives, height allowances, those types of things. What they're looking for is active nodes, transportation improvements, those types of things. We do also have some historic neighborhood associations, and any historic designation would still be in place, and historic guidelines would always be applied.
Okay,
I'm
I
back.
think we got everything, Andrea?
I think so.
Okay.
I think Ashley has a few more.
Yeah, Commissioner
No.
Squires, do you have some more
No.
follow-up?
Actually, I am finished, and I thank staff for their patience with my questions, and I will pass the baton on to the next commissioner.
Mr. Chairman?
Commissioner Bratnober.
Yeah, I have 2 questions for staff. The first is, I've been following it, but not in the most recent months. Can you tell me what is the current status of the Housing Land Trust work? And this is for either Andrea or Leah.
Yeah, Chairman, Commissioner Bratton, I'd be happy to answer that. So the Housing Land Trust officially launched with the Franklin and Orchard project, which I believe you heard last Monday at the corner of Franklin and Orchard. And so just a quick primer on Housing Land Trust. City retains ownership of the land, partners with the developer to create a very specific project with targeted levels of affordability. So that project is underway. It's on its way to City Council. We'll see how that hearing goes. And the city is pursuing other properties within the community. We've basically committed to closing on a site on State Street near the Veterans Park, 36th Street intersection area. But yeah, we're continuing to pursue that as well. We see that as a pretty important tool for us moving forward. The removing the cost of land from the development perspective or developer's perspective is a pretty powerful tool for getting the type of housing that we're asking for in this community.
Yeah, I was quite impressed with the Franklin Road project. There has been nothing completed prior to that, though. That is really the first try for us.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, the city has partnered in development in the past, but yes, that follows what we are calling the Housing Land Trust model. So
Okay, great, thanks. And my next one also for staff. So we've got this restriction of 30% AMI for rents. And I'm curious, given that Idaho does not allow rent control, how does this work? And obviously, we can pretty much guess there's going to be a lawsuit somewhere along the line on this whole thing. How does that play out, please?
Well, I'd be happy to answer that, or Andrea probably will give the same answer. These are all opt-in programs. So we're not requiring someone to give us that. They are choosing to participate in the program that we've developed and receive the funding and support that we're offering. They're choosing to make use of this ordinance to gain the bonuses that are associated with it if they do provide that housing. And the tool that really locks that down is an affordable housing covenant that we record with the developer that sets a time frame for that affordability. Kind of sets out, basically any covenant in terms of how you're protected and how we operate moving forward. But the key there is it's opt-in. So we're not forcing anyone to give us this. We're telling them if you want to be a part of the land trust, you want to receive funding through the incentives program, or you want to use the housing bonus ordinance, here's what we're asking for. And if you want to give us that, then you can have these things. So that's the focus.
So it may well end up getting challenged at some point.
I mean, I always like to talk to attorneys about how that works. I could see an exchange of property at some point and someone unfamiliar with a covenant recorded against the property that they now have to rent at a certain level. And how would we, how do we come back? I mean, that's part of what we're spelling out in that covenant as well, is kind of the recourse in the event that affordability is lost and that sort of thing.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Blanchard.
Just by way of wanting to make sure we're all focused on the same thing here, I just want to ask staff, and I'll just run through a series of questions. My understanding, Andrea and Leon, of the goals of this ordinance are fairly focused. And here's what my understanding is that goal one is to substantially increase the number of housing options for all income levels, to expand the housing incentive program, to maximize land use allowances, to simplify the regulations and development review process, to modernize the zones and development standards, and to incentivize developments that integrate various transportation modes and a mix of uses at targeted growth locations throughout the city. Have I got that? I got that right?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Blanchard, you are on the right track.
Okay, so this is not meant to be the silver bullet that will solve all of our affordable housing issues in this city, but just those very targeted 6 things that I mentioned right there, correct?
Yes, you are correct. The ultimate goal is to provide housing for all income levels, for all household sizes, and to really increase that product throughout the city.
Okay, thank you. And then, so then the logical conclusion there is We have other policy tools available that staff will be rolling out to P&Z and to council that will address people who are in the 30% to 50% AMI income level. Those are different challenges than what this ordinance is meant to address, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Moore.
I have a question relating to the height increases. So for staff, this is kind of, so I noticed that you had height increases, but it's set back from as you go up. How did you kind of come to, I guess, the height and the setback relationship when putting kind of those requirements together? Is that kind of a standard or?
I'll defer to Andrea on that, Chairman.
Unfortunately, I'm going to have to ask that you repeat that question. I went out during that question. So, Chair, Mr.
Absolutely. So in relation to the height setbacks, as you increase in height, it's set back a certain amount after a certain height. How are those dimensions kind of set? Is there a standard somewhere, or was there an analysis that was done on those setbacks?
Oh, Mr. Chair, Commissioner Moore, yes, we took a look at how we could evaluate projects as they are today. So we took that massing, that what could be built today, and then we said, how can we protect those residential neighbors that are zoned residential or have a single family or duplex located on them from that additional height, and to make it.
Oh, there she goes.
Commission, I wish I had these answers, but these are definitely
better. And so
Sorry. Sorry.
It's okay. So Andrea, we lost you there for a good portion of that. If you could
Okay.
maybe summarize quickly.
Yeah, so what we did was to try and integrate into a neighborhood where we would have a residential zone with a residential use that's either a single family or a duplex. We would take the traditional setbacks that would be applied, and then we added an additional 10 feet from both the sides as well as the rear to help that transition and step into the neighborhood further.
Oh, she's
Commissioner Moore, you're muted.
Mr. Chair, just a follow-up question.
Okay.
So that's just kind of a standard kind of dimension. There weren't any sort of, you spoke to preservation of solar access and things like that. That wasn't based off of any sort of study on that. It's just kind of a standard kind of setback that we looked at, or that you looked at.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Moore, we actually just kind of looked at best practice and what has been effective. And so based on that, that is how we arrived at the additional 10-foot setback.
Perfect. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Gillespie.
Okay. Andrea and Leon, can we turn to packet page 68, page 13 of 31 of your report? It's a section within the Activity Center Supportive Housing Bonus section. It's item C, relationship to other items, paragraph I, subparagraph B. It's basically talking about which projects are eligible for the streamlined administrative process. And it basically is, my reading of it, it says that if you're in an activity center And if you qualify for the AHB, the affordability bonus, then, and you're under 50 units, you get the streamline. But then earlier we would say, I thought we had agreed, or that you guys were going for that in the R3, that number was 25, not 50. So are we saying that an R3 zone that has the double bonus gets streamlined at 50 or at 25, or, and what you guys is thinking on that?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Gillespie. So if it was in the R3 zone, it would go back to the 25. So the lesser amount.
Right. Okay. So just a page note, you might want to clarify that language on that in that section. That's what I thought. Mr. Chairman, another question.
Please.
So just for the record, Andrea and Leon, and I haven't read this, the streamline procedure is already existing in the code, basically, right? Does it have the same notice requirements as a full-blown P&Z application in terms of all the homeowners in a certain radius or the property owners, as well as the neighborhood association? Would they still get that notice?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Gillespie. So we would not have the radius notice that would go to individuals within that 300-foot radius required by law. But we would still be notifying all the applicable agencies.
Oh, there she goes.
Oh,
And I'll reiterate, commissioners, Andrea certainly is the expert on the nuts and bolts of this ordinance. I'm more of the high level grower housing stuff. So I'll defer all very specific questions like that to Andrea.
Okay. Right. So Mr. Chairman, I just, because this is a legislative hearing, so we can sort of bookmark issues. But one of the things we maybe want to talk about is do we want to continue to require that the normal notice, what I'll call normal notice, even if it's a streamlined review process, just because of the nature of this particular, kind of development.
absolutely. Andrea, are you back?
I'm back.
Okay. Did you have anything else you wanted to add there? You got cut off.
No, I think I'm good, unless there's additional questions.
Commissioner Gillespie, anything else for staff? No, very good.
Mr. Chair,
Commissioner Moore, yeah.
one additional question. So how did the city arrive at that 25 or 50 unit kind of maximum before a hearing is required?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Moore, the city arrived at the original number of 50 based on best practices and recommendations from our consultants. When we heard concerns from our public, they had recommended that we select a number that was lower. So ultimately, we evaluated a number of the projects that we have reviewed throughout the years and tried to gauge when it would be appropriate to make that transition. The best we could come up with was 25 units. So while it wasn't purely scientific, we did give it a great deal of thought and did some research on what's happening in the city of Boise, as well as what's happening nationwide as best practices.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Squires.
that just kind of prompted a question to pop in my head. Did the city do any sort of evaluation as to potential number of projects that could have utilized this bonus, for example? I don't know if that question makes sense or not, but I mean, out of the normal amount of applications that are received, do you have like a certain percentage that you foresee moving forward with something like this?
Commissioner Chair, Commissioner Squires, Ultimately, we didn't look at every application that has passed by. What we did do is take traditional lot sizes, so 50 by 120 or 100 by 120, and evaluated how does the housing bonus impact that. And then we looked at a couple of different sites because we were contacted by developers saying, hey, what can I do? I already have an entitlement. Would that change things for me? We did some evaluations in that regard. And then we also took a couple of projects that didn't come forward, that they were originally proposed, they got their approvals, and they never came to fruition. And we said, okay, what would have happened in that particular case? So what we really found was parcels that are 1 acre and larger have the largest benefit. The smaller parcels, the biggest benefit that we get with that is that we get some additional bedroom counts. So where in a project we may have seen a fourplex that was all single unit, so 1 bedroom units or studio units, the housing bonus would allow those some of those units to become 2 bedroom to accommodate larger household size.
Thank you.
Okay, all. Andrea, Leon, thank you both for the presentation and your time.
Thank you.
Walked us
Thank you.
through it. I think it was a very, very nice job walking us through. This is a complex ordinance and a nice job presenting it. Very clear, very concise. We appreciate it. All of my questions have been asked and therefore answered by my fellow commissioners. So I think with this, we'll go ahead and close the question period here. And we're going to take a 5-minute break before we begin the public testimony of this item. So if everybody can step away for a few minutes, we'll reconvene here at 7:38 or so.
It's freezing in here.
It's the holiday season. Ashley's right on time. Everybody else is 2 minutes late.
Was just listening to you guys.
You have the upper hand.
Guys, it's cold in here tonight. What?
Oh, did I say that out loud? Okay, looks like all of our commissioners are back. Okay, we'll get going here, open up our public testimony for this item. A couple of notes up front for everybody in the audience tonight. We're going to make sure and limit everyone's time to 3 minutes. Please state your name and address when you begin your testimony. We have a couple of gentlemen live and in person here this evening. We're going to start with these gentlemen, and then we'll move on to those folks that signed up. I have a handful of folks that signed up ahead of time. We'll run through those in order, and then everybody else online after that. So with that, if you gentlemen would like to come up to the podium here, you can begin your testimony.
David Klinger, 1404 North 24th Street. I first started coming to Boise in the early 1990s on business. At that time, there was no housing availability crisis in Boise, nor a housing affordability crisis. When I moved to Boise in 2012, just 8 years ago, there still was no housing availability crisis here and no housing affordability crisis. You could still buy a house in this town for a reasonable price. You could still find an apartment for a reasonable rent. Now we do face a housing availability crisis in Boise and a housing affordability crisis. And we are told that the only way out of these twin dilemmas is for Boise neighborhoods to just suck it up. With a holiday cornucopia of housing bonuses, come-ons, and inducements to developers to somehow fix things urgently. Well, as we say down south, that old dog won't hunt. More and more people in this city are beginning to realize this housing crisis may have been manufactured, allowed to happen, not by market forces, but by the active encouragement of eager city leadership, civic boosters, and those in the development world who stood to profit by over-marketing an under-ready city. Commissioners, I really do think it's important to pause and acknowledge just how we got in such a fix. I don't deny the reality of this problem. This city is in a housing bind. But what is proposed tonight is one of the most overarching packages of regulatory overhauls and sweeping changes we have ever attempted in this city to fix a problem not of the citizens' making. We best know what we're doing. In the middle of a pandemic, in the middle of holiday season, with a distracted population who cannot properly engage with you tonight, we propose to pass a still poorly understood housing bonus 10 days before Christmas, and then return 10 days after New Year's for the City Council to ratify it. I am one of only 2 members of the public who stands before you in this auditorium tonight. This is still too much, too fast, too impactful. The rushed process makes a mockery of our new mayor's pronouncements on maximum transparency and adequate public engagement. You still have not sufficiently educated this city about what you propose to do. Pause, take some more time. These are consequential decisions before you. The Boise public deserves better consideration in how you propose to so vastly remake their city. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Klinger. Okay.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. I'll try and be brief. My name is Michael Prentice, and I live at 1910 North 23rd Street here in Boise. I think I have some various perspectives on this whole thing. Number one, I live here. Number two, I own rental units here. I have a piece of ground I'm interested in developing and would apply for these affordable housing bonus units if on that ground. I also grew up living in an apartment building, and there was no such thing as low income housing at the time, but it would have fit that bill, I think. First of all, there is a shortage of housing, and there is a lot of demand for rental apartments. I'm going to give 3 suggestions. Number one, the 80% threshold of AMI, I'm going to suggest it should be closer to 60%. And there's been a lot of talk, well, we address the 30 to 50%, but you still have that gap between 50 and 80. I think lowering it to 60% makes sense. As far the other suggestion is the streamlined process. I think it makes sense in a lot of ways. And I think there's been some compelling arguments made that it shouldn't be in residential, and residential neighborhoods should have some say. I don't disagree with that. I'd want some say in my neighborhood. However, there's also, if you lower the streamlined process for the residential neighborhoods, what I'm going to suggest is maybe consider increasing it for commercial neighborhoods. And maybe you get a little bit more bang for your buck there. So those are my 3 suggestions. Again, lower the AMI to 60%. Maybe lower if a streamlined process, do away with it all together for residential, but then consider increasing it for the commercial. That's it. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Prentice. Okay, that does it for our in-person folks who want to testify this evening. We'll go ahead and move to everyone online and those who signed up ahead of time. I'm going to go ahead and run through the list here of folks that signed up ahead of time. And if you could, when you hear your name, please raise your hand and we'll get you set up so you can speak. Shellen Rodriguez, Ed McCluskey, and Richard Llewellyn are the first 3 on our list.
Hi, is Shellen Rodriguez the first on your list?
It is, yeah.
Oh, sorry. Celine, just so you know, when you let people enter, it pauses everything. So you lose sound for a good 40 or 30 seconds. So I wasn't clear. Thank you for your patience. Shellen Rodriguez, for the record, my address is 529 North Hillview Drive here in Boise. First of all, thank you to the staff who put together a really great presentation. I think they, clearly everyone's been working hard on this. And I also would like to thank you as commissioners in taking the time to really dig into these issues. There's a lot of people that care about this stuff, and I strongly believe that it's because it affects our community and it affects our neighborhoods, and we love this city. That's certainly why I live here, and it's certainly why I chose to take my time out to listen to the conversation today. So with that said, I think affordable housing is one of the most difficult challenges that this community faces right now. We have a shortage, and we have a shortage in supply, and we have a shortage in supply that is restricted to certain incomes. I've been in this industry in some realm, whether it be on the private side as a developer or on the public side and trying to work with developers to put together public-private partnerships to create more housing. In doing that, I can attest, I've done that all over the Western United States, and I can attest that there is no silver bullet to solving this issue. There is no one policy that we can pass as a community to help this issue end. This ordinance is one tool, and it's one of the very few tools that we as a community have access to in our state. It is an incentivization. It is a carrot, not a stick, and it enables people, developers, to make the choice to use it. I strongly believe that this ordinance should be passed as is, and I would go so far to say I strongly believe you should put back in the up to 50 units threshold in order to create that supply that this community is in dire need of. So I won't take too much of your time, but I would urge you to lead in this issue as leaders of our community. I would urge you to not let the perfect get in the way of the very good. And I would urge you to vote to adopt this ordinance. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Rodriguez. Ed McCluskey is up next.
Mute. Now can you hear me?
We can. Good evening.
Oh, great. It's good to see you all. I'm Ed McCluskey at 1919 Verna Lane, 83706. As revised and scheduled, this fast track still eclipses the public sphere through timing, ambiguous contractions to appeals, and recently changed goalposts. In the midst of our raging pandemic, not everyone who could speak to this still sweeping zoning proposal can participate. This is therefore the worst time to fast track questionable decisions of such wide and deep impacts. This late hour revision questionably promises that R2 zones will not really be touched by these upzones. Clauses under relationship to other housing bonuses open doors to assault overly densified neighborhoods in several residential zones. I urge stopping this fast tracking in its tracks so that residents at large can review what so far has been discussed by really too few, even through neighborhood associations. This proposal values efficiency over public hearings, but you have the equivalent of a fiduciary responsibility to the people, not to misleadingly labeled stakeholders. As a professor of communication, I know that labeling loves ambiguity. Here, it buries ongoing threats to livability in R2 and other zones. Ambiguity is the greatest linguistic friend of public relations workers. It conceals multiple meanings that political language too rarely owns up to. But when words meet action, clarity can emerge to eclipse other meanings. Some come to light, showing an arrogance of power and privilege instead of respect for public process. That speaks for meanings from relatively privileged or desperate classes. Most cannot repurchase or purchase for the first time, facing, if not homelessness, consignment to perpetual renting and disappearance from the middle class. But the box always gets checked, doesn't it, with pro forma claims of public engagement, claims where the life of ambiguity lives on to the detriment of the people's voice. City PR campaigns too often have legitimized the undue influence of financed city and state Goliaths with ambiguous labels like stakeholder and progress. I've taught entire semesters on that kind of ambiguity as an index of the erosion of the public sphere. The public should not be the city's guinea pig writ large for this alleged interim research. This is not an opt-in ordinance for the public. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, Mr. McCluskey. Richard Llewellyn's up next, followed by Stacy Alexander, Bart Cochran, and Jenny McTaggart.
Great. Thank you. Can you hear me?
We can, yes.
Great. Thank you. Richard Llewellyn. These are my personal comments. Richard Llewellyn, 9170 Hill Road, Boise, Idaho. First of all, I didn't have time, but I would like to thank staff. They have, I think, been under unusual pressure and have responded to comments and are trying to make this a better ordinance. And I do appreciate that. They have been responsive. But we need more of that. We need more of this kind of discussion. There's still a lot of things to be worked out, even if you agree with the general purpose. And I agree with from a very high level perspective of the larger intent to use incentives to actually produce affordable housing or other public benefits such as adaptive reuse and perhaps transit supportive density. Those are good things, but it's still very unclear if this is going to get us there. And that's simply because it's a huge rewrite, and we just simply need more discussion at this point. Specifically, those were great questions about the notification issues. And when you get into a weird situation like this, where somebody would be notified if their neighbor is going to be expanding a carport, but not notified if somebody's going to build a 6-story apartment building next to them, that's potentially very weird. And so is that not correct? Chris, I see you saying no. If that's not correct, then my understanding was that a notification is not the same as it normally would be because of the administrative review. If that is the case, and perhaps I'm wrong here, but if that is the case, it's weird, right? And weird is typically a good direction to go in. And then again, I cannot overemphasize, as long as we have part of this ordinance giving the choice of building what is already being built, market rate housing, which is 100% AMI. That's actually above the new construction in my neighborhood. So as long as that is an option, nobody except a charitable organization is going to choose the 80% AMI, right? So let's not even talk about 80% because it's deceptive. So what this does is it incentivizes folks to build what's already being built. Now, if you remove that, that would be my recommendation. Go to 60 or 80%. Now they actually have to choose what kind of affordable housing will we build? And we're actually moving the ball down the field in the direction we need to. Incrementally, it doesn't solve the big picture. No, nothing does. But at least we're doing something. So I highly recommend that. Just realize that there is no incentive to build affordable housing with it as it exists. So thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Llewellyn. All right. Ms. Alexander.
Yes, I'm here. Can everyone hear me?
We can.
Okay, great. My name is Stacy Alexander, and I live at 1519 West 4th Street, Boise, Idaho, 83702. Mr. Chair, members of the commission, I speak to you tonight as a citizen. I'm not a developer's agent or a member of the Wall Street elite. My opinion is not bought and paid for. I'm a Boisean and a mother looking out for my children's future and the future of the city. I would like to express my support for the housing ordinance since the city lacks a number of tools to provide affordable housing. Compared to most states, Idaho has a severe lack of policies used to ensure housing affordability. My support includes 3 reasons. First, the need is dire. Pretty much any amount of time spent in Boise will illuminate that. This ordinance represents action when action is needed. Second, the opposition brings no reasonable alternate solutions. Many of those opposing the ordinance tonight have or will lament the process. It wasn't long enough, didn't involve the right people, happened at the wrong time, was disingenuous or misguided, et cetera, et cetera. We've heard this argument time and time again from various groups worried about Boise's growth, and I know it's familiar to you. Sadly, their message has and will continue to erode the public's trust in the city's staff, as well as its elected and appointed officials. The primary alternative I've been able to find from these groups is an affordable housing overlay. Any land use professional will tell you that overlays are challenging, and they inherently say that affordable housing belongs here, not over there. Housing that's affordable should not be exclusive, but instead should be part of the fabric of this entire community. Along those lines, this ordinance should actually be broader in its reach and applicability, covering all residential zones. Third, this is an opportunity to have, at a minimum, an interim measure while the code rewrite is underway. This could be viewed as a trial phase with notable successes and lessons learned informing the code rewrite. The opposition tonight is simply not seeing the forest for the trees, and I can't thank you enough for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Alexander. Okay, we'll move on to Bart Cochran, then Jenny McTaggart, Lauren Panisi, and Jody Hull. I believe Mr. Cochran's on. Yeah.
Great. Good evening, commissioners. My name is Bart Cochran. Address is 3401 North 39th Street. I'm the executive director and founder of an organization called Leap Housing Solutions. We're an affordable housing nonprofit in the community. And I just want to just express my support of the housing bonus ordinance tonight. And kudos to Andrea and to Leon in the public comment process. I think it was neat to see all the revisions due to the feedback. I think it was very responsive to the community's concerns. And as a housing practitioner, we're keenly aware of the affordable housing challenges in Boise, and with rising costs and inbound migration, and even compounded with COVID-19, the challenges are just getting more and more difficult. I think many of you know that. But what we know for sure is that it's not getting any better naturally. And so we need a solution. So LEAP, as a result, LEAP supports the housing bonus ordinance because it will improve affordability and therefore choice. So speaking from experience, affordable housing is often done creatively. So we use multi-layer capital stacks. We get donated land. We take donations from the community. We use federal funding. We often joke that capital stacks for affordable housing are put together with baling, twine, and bubble gum. And it's capital intensive to create affordable housing in this community. And there are many, many barriers. We just can't create housing fast enough, affordable housing options fast enough. And so we believe that the housing bonus ordinance reduces some of those barriers and makes it more feasible to create affordable housing. Although, of course, as a nonprofit affordable housing provider, we, of course, believe the city can always go further. But we do believe that this housing bonus ordinance will materially impact the creation of affordable housing in the community. So we think at the end of the day, more housing gets created as a result. And I think that's the point. And so tonight, we just want to urge you and just to please approve this effective tool for affordable housing. So thank you for listening.
Thank you, Mr. Cochran. Jenny McTaggart.
Yes. Hi, my name is Jenny McTaggart, and I live at 2106 West Jefferson Street. I am here because I do not support the proposed housing bonus ordinance as written. As a West End neighborhood resident, I support the comments made by the West End Neighborhood Association and wish to add my own comments. I oppose the proposed streamlined approval process overall. The proposed streamlined approval process circumvents the process currently established by the zoning code. By doing this, it removes the checks and balances that are essential for higher density projects. These checks and balances ensure that developments are beneficial to neighborhoods, citizens, the city, and developers. By streamlining the process, neighborhoods and individuals lose the opportunity to have a voice to ensure a balance of interests on larger density projects. Under this proposal, developers will be given many incentives. The proposed streamlined approval process, which allows for modifying development practices at an administrative level entertains a lot of coloring outside of the lines. And I deserve a voice, the public deserves a voice, the neighborhood deserves a voice. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. McTaggart. Up next is Lauren Panisi.
Very good. You got it right.
All right.
Lauren Panisi, thank you. I live at 2411 West Pleasanton Avenue in Boise. I echo many of the comments that have already been shared, in particular, Dave Klinger and Jenny McTaggart. The transparency and public input is critical. In my neighborhood, which is the West End, we've had several projects that were the result of neighborhood input to comment and work with the developer. That was a critical part of the process. From the initial, even though it was the 300-foot notification, all of that was necessary, and would be a shame to lose that. The other thing is to delay or defer public input to the appeal or design review process. It's very difficult at that point to affect any change because the project is approved, and only under very specific and certain criteria could a resident affect or influence any change at that point because the project's approved. So we're kind of stuck and left with the result of whatever the development turns out to be. As it is, I also had a question about how the, for us, the 30th Street Master Plan, how that works with or is affected by these bonus ordinances. That 30th Street Master Plan was very important in shaping our neighborhood. Does that go out the window now in favor of bonus ordinances? We have a development going up right now where Jerry's Market used to be. It's 3 stories. It is a big square box. It looks like a prison, quite honestly. Does not fit in our neighborhood, yet this is what everyone is telling us the city needs and we must have. Yet we have to live with the way it looks, the traffic, and all of these other things that go along with it. So that's another point that I have. My other point was about the sustainability. That was like #1 on the list of the 7 principles, I guess, the city is trying to adhere to. We're knocking down houses, buildings here in favor of building new ones. How does that fit with the sustainability? I don't understand that. I feel that these bonus ordinance put all the power with the developers and leaves the residents of the neighborhoods out. And I don't understand what the rush is and why we can't be part of the process. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Panisi. Up next, Jody Hull, followed by Katie Fight, then Chris Runyon, and Pam Romer. Sorry.
Oh, there we go. This is my first Zoom council meeting or public meeting like this. My name is Jody Hull and I live at 7916 West Queen Court, Boise, Idaho, near Fairview and Milwaukee. And I would echo the last speaker, Lauren. I have almost all the same concerns she does about the public process, participation. Right now, that's all we have to influence what goes on in our neighborhood because design review is, like she said, after it's already been approved. And I also, echo several other people, Mr. Klinger, about the ripeness of this ordinance. It does feel rushed. I am a member of the West Bench Neighbors Association, and I know we haven't even talked about this as an association at all. So I don't, and then I attended the charade, dinner things in 2018, and I know it was just about, we talked about concerns, but it wasn't specifics. And so I'm also concerned about where's the proof that this will actually do anything? Like they said, the 80% is already 80 to 100% is already what's being built. So will it actually do anything? A lot of these ordinances are to the benefit of the developers and not the citizens, and to take us out of the, process even further. And the housing market is not under our control. It's not under the control of the citizens of Boise. It's not under the control of the city council or the zoning commission. It's under the control of the housing commodity market, and they will build what they want to build, and they're going to want to build more and bigger and get whatever they can, bonuses, and not, there are charity organizations, but these people mostly are here for the, the profit. So we have to like they said, there's other tools we need to do, even if we lower it to 60%. I don't think this is the solution, especially I'm in an R2 zone, and I was very nervous when I first saw this proposed for my little duplex development, because we border C1 or commercial. I'm right off Fairview, like 2 blocks, and there's a kind of failed little commercial building next to me, and that could, have a whatever 3 or 4 story apartment complex without any notice to my neighborhood, and we were like 10 feet away from it. So very concerned. And I don't know how this would even relate to commercial, because Fairview, as we know, is a mess right now, and the proposed development down there at Big O has already been canceled. It's just, I don't see, we don't have public transportation to make a thing like this work with the reduced parking. And so I don't think that this is, like they said, the time. We haven't really had the participation we need. This is very difficult to be on a Zoom call for a lot of people, and to rush it through during the holidays, that's, not the best timing. And I think that with the changes and the modifications and the questions today, that I think it needs to be ironed out before it gets passed on to the city council. And I don't think that, we should just try it out and see how it works, because we could get some really crappy development in and decide it doesn't work. We need to have it ready to work, proof to work before we approve it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hull. Katie Fight.
Hello?
Hello, we can hear you.
Okay, yes, Katie Fight, 1006 North 5th Street, Boise. This proposal mirrors what I've lived through as a public lands activist for the past 4 years. Assaults on clean air, clean water, endangered species, you name it, are all justified under the claim that they're streamlining a public process. Streamlining a public process means the public's voice gets cut out. You look at something like the border wall. What happened with the border wall? All environmental regulations were suspended, including the public being able to have a voice in anything that went on with that. So it's deeply, deeply concerning to see here in Boise, where I live, that the city is proposing to cut the public out of crucial parts of a public process. And it's very confusing to me exactly what part of the public process and how the public would be engaged in it and how they wouldn't. Second, I'd like to challenge the claim that this is environmentally friendly. We're losing green space. We're losing our urban forest. We're losing so much of the cooling, air filtering, you name it, amenities in this town. And they're being replaced by these big, blocky development structures that are harsh, harsh environments for people to live in, quite frankly. And this is exactly what this proposal would do: plunk down 25 units, potentially right next to somebody's house or a couple houses away. And to claim that a 20-foot setback would effectively moderate the effect of a tall building cutting out the sun from your house in winter and drastically altering your view, that's just nonsense. And then I would also like to say, I think this is being spun to you. I think it was spun to you, with all due respect to the staff and how the staff presentations were presented. For example, Ms. Tuning gave her a list of 8 or 9 or 10 public concerns. Well, I read through the same agenda packet and I sure saw public process being cut out as a major concern. Yet that wasn't even on the list that you were presented with. I urge you to reject this proposal, take time for full public involvement, and look before you leap. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Fight. Up next is Chris Runyon, followed by Pam Romer, then Marcia Franklin and Erica Schofield.
Yeah, hi there. Can you hear me?
We can.
Yeah, hi. Thank you, everybody. My name is Chris Runyon. I live at 606 Brookdale Drive in Boise. I was born and raised here and have since spent the majority of my adult life here as well. I will start by saying I feel like the proposal reads more like it was made by developers for developers, rather than the city of Boise leveraging current investment demand to secure affordable housing for Boise residents. I echo a lot of the concerns that were already brought up. I'll try to bring up a few others. I am very concerned with the adaptive reuse section of the ordinance, specifically the targeting of churches for adaptive reuse into housing. I believe the city of Boise should exclude churches from the adaptive reuse section due to the following reasons. There are numerous congregations in Boise currently planning and looking for permanent church buildings, and additional incentives provided by the city of Boise to develop these into housing will greatly limit this opportunity. The city of Boise does not need to incentivize the development of churches into housing. A 109-year-old church located in the north end on Eastman Street is currently being converted into a single-family residence and recently listed on Zillow at $3.2 million. My third point is the main selling point of this ordinance is to provide affordable housing. The adaptive reuse bonus does not require this median income requirement, thus encouraging the conversion of these historical structures into million-dollar homes, and not even fulfilling the intended goal of the ordinance. Churches in Boise have not only provided places of worship for many various religions, they have also served as places for community activities and community support, including substance abuse meetings, after-school daycare, nonprofit fundraisers for disadvantaged youth, such as Big Brothers Big Sisters, et cetera, et cetera. The value of this to the community should not be traded for yet another million-dollar home. With regards to other components of the housing proposal, I'd like to also stress that how well the intent of the ordinance aligns with the outcome is highly dependent on how clearly it is written. For instance, the selling point to Boise residents of accessory dwelling units was to provide for more long-term rental opportunities. But residents, due to inadequate requirements, many of the ADUs are actually being rented as short-term vacation rentals. I feel the way the housing bonus proposal is currently drafted based on, quote, keeping the provisions relatively simple as recommended by the consultant who the city hired to develop the ordinance to incentivize development. Due to this approach, sadly, I believe this proposal will also not meet the original intent of the ordinance. The proposal seeks to obtain a 30-year commitment from a developer, but does not spell out what happens if the developer sells the property. This lack of detail inherent in keeping the provisions simple sets the city up with potentially losing the community benefit the proposal was predicated on. Once again, thank you for your time, and I urge you not to pass the current proposal.
Thank you, Mr. Runyon. Up next, Pam Romer, then Marcia Franklin, Erica Schofield, and Alexandra Monjar.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
You can.
All right. This is Pam Romer. I live at 2001 West Boise Avenue, number 8. Thank you for your time. I am not in support of this ordinance. Please don't eliminate our public input. I'm really enjoying the process of having something to say and contributing to the goodness of Boise. This ordinance seems to be targeting people who make almost $25 an hour and up. So this isn't very helpful to those who are making below 80%. We're not even allowed to rent unless we have 30% of our income available for rent, it seems like. It's becoming where it's not our choice if we want to pay more than 30%. I don't have cable. I can put that toward housing rent. I don't eat out a lot. I can put that toward my housing rent. And it seems like that choice is being taken away from me. I have to have 30% to be able to find a place to rent, and there's not much in the way of affordability. Also, in looking over the chart that they say they got from HUD, I'm having a hard time getting the numbers to match up. When it does the 30%, I'm looking at a lower rent than what it's stating. And so I'm wondering if Leon, I left you a voicemail, if you could get back to me maybe later or steer me someplace where I could maybe get some better numbers to see how that works, because I'm not seeing it. So thank you very much. Please keep in mind, we would like to have a nice place to live, even if it is small, even if it's not all the amenities like dishwashers. I love washing dishes by hand. I don't need a dishwasher. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Romer. Marsha Franklin. I believe you're muted.
I am unmuted. Thank you so much. My name is Marsha Franklin, and I live at 2521 West Stewart Avenue. I would ask that you defer action on this proposal so that more public understanding of it can occur and that several aspects of it can be modified. Even with recent changes in the document, this is a huge transformation in Boise's code with definitions that will provide the foundation for an even larger rezone. I consider myself to be a person relatively in the know, but I wasn't aware of this proposal until recently. I'm confused by that, as the city does have the tools to do a broader public information campaign. Now, the goals of the proposed ordinance are not likely to be in dispute, but the manner of achieving them raises alarm bells. For instance, the removal of public hearings for up to 50 units in some instances, or even 25, is ill-advised and frankly undemocratic. I realize, having sat through hundreds of public hearings at the legislature, that they slow the process. But as we know, democracy is messy. It's important that citizens have an opportunity to be heard in public, not just the developers behind the scenes. It's important for history that there's a public record of both support and concern for a project. And it's important, frankly, that citizens hear from each other. We've been told, oh, you don't need to worry, you'll still have the same protections under an administrative process. But as I read it, that would only be on appeal, plus administrative processes aren't noticed to the public, are based on objective criteria, and are often done in 2 weeks. By the time a project is at design review, my experience is it's too late. Projects as large as 50 units almost always involve subjective criteria, hence why they come before public hearings. We have a new 28-unit development in my neighborhood. Even with a public hearing, it's created great consternation, and that's only 3 units larger than one that would receive no public hearing. We had a proposed development of 9 units in my neighborhood that was controversial. So why was 24 units picked as the cutoff, or 49? This will just take already contentious developments and make them even more so. And in an era when we need more public participation, this suffocates it. I would also note, as Commissioner Gillespie did, that while R2 appears to have been removed from the proposal, it still reads that if both the affordable housing and adaptive reuse standards have been met, quote, in all zoning districts, buildings containing less than 50 dwelling units may be approved administratively. R2 and R3 should be removed there. Also, will the promises by developers to provide affordable housing be monitored? Is the covenant enough, or can there be a developer's fee charge so that city staff can be hired to check these rental rates and see whether they stayed at 30% of AMI? Otherwise, this is for naught. I'm hearing for the first time this would be an interim ordinance. If that's the case, a date certain for its expiration should be appended to it. And, you know, with the removal of R2 from this proposal, my house is not directly affected by it. But anytime a law is changed to restrict public input, it affects all of us. So that's why I'm concerned. A proposal like this deserves to have more public involvement, especially during times like these when we can't meet in person. Thank you for the opportunity to testify.
Thank you, Ms. Franklin. Erica Schofield.
Can you hear me?
We can.
Okay, hello, thank you. Erica Schofield, 7363 West Limelight Court, Boise. I'd like to read a brief statement that was included in the August 5th memorandum of the consultants who drafted the original language for this ordinance. It says, experience shows that often the most powerful bonuses are those that are allowed by projects to be approved administratively without the need for potentially contentious public hearings. They go on to explain a bit about the return on investment by saving time. And then the consultants proposed that in some of the office and commercial zone districts, projects could be considered for administrative approval. That was some of those areas and did not include residential. I think that's important for people to know that. It's in the public record on the August 25th work session. In addition, there's a little small part of the Idaho Code 67-6521 that allows affected persons to petition for a hearing if a hearing has not been held. And this process involves the gathering of 20 signatures from those within 300 feet of the external boundary of a parcel. And it's to follow the provisions under Idaho Code 676512B. And those are the provisions. The other part of those provisions specifically says that the public hearing is, quote, to be before a planning commission, a planning and zoning commission, or a governing board. That does not say it's to be before a design review that doesn't have the authority to approve land use permits. The other important point I want to make in this application is that Idaho Code 676511-2 requires any amendment to a zoning ordinance be evaluated for the impact on public services, including school districts. The city did send the transmittal document to the 66 various entities, and that does not include the 34 neighborhood associations, and only one response shows up in the project report from Public Works. I have a really big problem with this because we are hearing over and over again how lack of coordination for development across the entire valley, because what Boise does impacts Ada County services. We heard from one agency when we had 66 on the list. How are we supposed to believe in coordinated development when we're not actually getting responses at all from all the other agencies that could be impacted by this ordinance? And then finally, I want to jump back to the administrative approval. You might be creating an unintended consequence by going that route when then the process goes down the road, it gets to design review, and citizens are aware that they can petition for a hearing. You might end up with an even longer process than you would if you kept the process in place that exists today. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Schofield. Alexandra Monjar.
Hi, yes. My name is Alexandra Monjar, and I live at 2222 West Kootenai Street in Boise. I'm speaking today in support of this ordinance. When my husband and I moved to Boise 6 years ago as recent graduates, our household income fit into the targeted range of this ordinance, and we did find it difficult to secure housing in established neighborhoods that were within walking distance of employment, grocery stores, and our everyday needs. This was important to us from an environmental perspective. And so I believe that this ordinance does support environmental stewardship for the city. The benefits of infill development are many, and this is one of them, maximizing the investments in infrastructure and encouraging different mobility use, walking and biking and transit, supporting a car light or car less lifestyle. I also believe that infill builds more connected communities through greater density, low density, car oriented, exclusively single family development, popular since the post-war era, has eroded a collective sense of community and deteriorated our public health. So I express general support for this ordinance as written, and I'm glad to see the city is working quickly to address the need for housing production and distribute it citywide. I think that the streamlined process is particularly impactful for small scale developers, and I encourage that to remain. And when I think about the great examples of missing middle housing, I think about the North End. which is mostly R1. And so I am discouraged to see that R1 and R2 are not included in several of these bonuses. I think that these communities, those neighborhoods are some of the best places to have this infill development. And I would like to see the city consider targeting some bonuses for these in the future. I'm happy to see that the adaptive reuse includes those zones still. I also think that the city should consider reducing parking requirements further. The architect that's behind the missing middle housing movement, Dan Perlick, recommends 1 parking space per unit as a maximum and actually prefers no requirements when he assists cities in developing missing middle ordinances. The market will likely still provide parking by demand. And so I think that the city should consider removing parking minimums, especially in the zones that are targeted for activity centers. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Monjar. Okay, that is, I think, the end. Yeah, that is all the names that signed up in advance to testify. If you are online and would like to testify on this item, please raise your hand virtually. And we will run down the list from top to bottom. We've done a nice job so far. Just a little reminder, 3 minutes per person. Name and address when you begin your testimony. Up first, it looks like we have Esther Seha, and then Kathy Sherman, and then Patrick Spouts.
Mr. Chair, I already moved over Monica Fabi.
Oh.
Fabi, sorry.
I apologize. Ms. Fabi, you're up.
Sorry, it took me a minute to figure out how to get to unmute. Can you hear me?
You can,
okay,
yes.
Evidently. My name is Monica Fabi. I live at 630 South Curtis Road, Boise, Idaho, and live and work at 4696 West Overland Road. I'm speaking on behalf of the Intermountain Fair Housing Council. Intermountain Fair Housing Council is a nonprofit organization whose mission is to ensure open and inclusive housing for all persons without regard to race, color, sex, religion, identity, national origin, familial status, sexual orientation, gender identity, a source of income, or disability. The IFHC attempts to eradicate discrimination through education on the fair housing laws, information and referral, housing counseling and assistance with mediating and/or filing fair housing complaints, among other things. The IFHC also provides education and outreach on fair housing laws and practices to housing providers and others. As we know, in the Treasure Valley, the highest need for housing is for those with disabilities, families with children, and people of color, and that these groups are most discriminated against in housing and community, while their needs for subsidized and affordable housing is the greatest. It is important that when proposing significant changes to the zoning code law, the city should examine all proposals through the fair housing lens, including whether it will provide equal access to community displaced residents, demolish affordable housing, cause discriminatory gentrification, impact health and well-being, and the like. It is imperative to start any conversation about zoning codes by acknowledging that historically zoning laws were often used to enforce discrimination and segregation in our cities. Zoning ordinances were promoted nationwide to reserve middle-class neighborhoods for single-family homes that lower income families of all races could afford, thereby excluding lower income African Americans from living in neighborhoods where middle-class whites resided. We recommend reading Richard Rothstein's The Color of Law. Addressing the damage caused by those policies over multiple generations will be a long and challenging process for communities that choose to undertake it. In our reading of the housing bonus ordinance, we believe that the affordable thresholds and the percentage of required deed restricted units is weak and insufficient. We object to the removal of impacted residents from the development process, even though the need for housing in our community is strongest among the extremely low income and low income 0 to 80% AMI. The housing bonus ordinance only addresses those at moderate income levels, 80 to 100%. Since the definition of low income is described as earning less than 80% of AMI, the HBO is not serving that part of the market. It should be targeted for low income residents that the market is otherwise not producing and requires government stimulations to incentivize. In addition, with as little as 10% of deed restricted units.
Your time is up.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Seha, I believe is next.
Thank you. Good evening, commissioners. Thank you for the opportunity to provide comment this evening. The comments provided are my personal comments as a longtime resident of Boise. Can you guys hear me?
Address, please, for the record.
Yes, 3901 North Cambria Way, Boise 83705.
Great, thank you. I'm sorry for the interruption.
No, that's okay. So I have a couple of items and I'll try to be quick. Transparency and community engagement is the first. I am the planning and zoning committee member for the Collister Neighborhood Association, and I didn't learn of this proposal until mid-November. It appears that the limited outreach efforts conducted for this proposal were poorly implemented. In reading through the city's website regarding this proposal, there is mention of the 2018-2019 community conversations on growth and transportation and how they informed the housing bonus efforts. In addition, Andrea Tuning's December 14, 2020 report indicates that significant input was received during the 8 community conversations. As a participant of both the community conversation workshops, it was clear the city had overlooked outreach and participation to vulnerable populations. While the workshops were well attended, they were not a true representation of the makeup of the city. Considering the time frame of the housing proposal and the fact that I, as a CNA planning and zoning board member, did not receive a notice for distribution to our neighborhood is concerning in and of itself. The city needs to be transparent, thoughtful, and inclusive in their outreach plans to ensure that residents are provided with sufficient time to participate in the process. My second item is diversity of housing. Affordable housing shouldn't just be limited to specific areas of the city. I understand why we want to focus on density within transit or activity corridors, but to some extent, this approach concentrates affordable housing to specific sections of the city. We should be striving for diverse housing options throughout the city. I do not support the removal of R2 from the housing bonus proposal and ask that it remain. I support the adaptive reuse bonus proposal. I live near State Street and there are still some affordable housing options within an 1/8 to a 4th mile of the State Street corridor. I have concern this type of proposal may lead to gentrification along the State Street corridor and other transit corridors in the city. I have heard concerns from Section 8 housing residents, specifically that their landlord will decide to evict the residents and redevelop this property to take advantage of the housing bonus. It is important that the city evaluates how these types of ordinances, while on the surface may seem sound, but once implemented may result in larger issues with displacement of low-income residents. My third item is proposed affordable housing unit percentages. First, I support the 30-year restricted income unit. However, I do believe that we need to think long-term. What happens after 30 years? Do we have the option of renewing the proposed 30-year agreement for an additional 30 years? I have concerns similar to what you've heard this evening about the affordable threshold percentages. I think that they need to be lower than 80%. And lastly, streamlined administrative process. I have serious concerns about the streamlined administrative process proposal and notification to the community. It has been my experience as recent as last month, city notifications regarding projects within the Collister neighborhood boundaries are not always provided to the association.
Thank you, Ms. Seha. That's your time. Up next is Kathy Sherman.
Hi there. My name is Kathy Sherman. I live at 3208 Treasure Drive in Boise, 03. I'm on the board of my neighborhood association. And I'd like to talk, and for my profession, I Oh, I can have my video started. Wow. There you go. Professionally, I'm the housing specialist for veterans for the Supportive Services for Veterans Families project with LADA Boise. So for the past 3 years, I've been looking for housing for veterans. In order to be in our program, they have to be at 50% of AMI. But I'd like to talk to you for a moment about the 30% AMI. As recently as today, I want to talk to you about the affordability gap in county units per 100 people. So in Ada County, the Idaho households making 30% of AMI, there are 19 houses available for those 100 folks. And more startling statistics than that are the cost burdens of those folks who are at 30% AMI. If you're at 30 to 50% of income, if your cost burden means you're spending 30 to 50% of your household income on housing, in Ada County, for those 30%ers, you are spending 94% of the 30%ers are spending more than 30% of their income on housing. So for my program, I house about 100 veterans every year, and it gets harder and harder to find those housing units. And what I want to say is that anything we can do to provide more housing and more housing for those 30%ers, we're doing a good thing in our community. I would like this initiative to also include, I live in Sunset Neighborhood Association. We look at ourselves as the funnel. So we all have big backyards. Let's make this easy for homeowners to also do the same, to be able to be those, have the same threshold as developers do. So from that perspective, I think in general, this is a good thing because it defeats NIMBYism. I have watched too many times good proposals come before you and we compromise by letting more expensive housing going in with fewer units. And this is it's a good proposal. Start. I would say, let's do a 3-month test period. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Sherman. Up next, Patrick, I believe Patrick Spouts is next. And then Jared Ostein, Elaine Kazikoff, Lori DeCare.
Thank you. My name is Patrick Spouts. I live at 912 West Brumbach, Boise, and I want to speak strongly in support of this ordinance. I think it is a wonderful first step, one of our first steps to welcome new neighbors into a variety of corners of our city. I think this ordinance is appropriately scoped, that provides modest incentive and some streamlined processes that will target, admittedly, just one segment of our affordable housing need. As many comments have been put forth today, this is not by any means the silver bullet end all solution, et cetera, to our housing challenges, but I think it's an important and wonderful first step. And I strongly encourage the team today to move this forward to City Council in support. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Spouts. Up next, Jared Ostein.
Austin, thank you. I'd just like to thank my name is Jared Austin. My address is 4211 West Fairmont Street. I'd just like to thank the commission for hearing us all today. So we have a lot of thoughts and feelings on this, and I'd like to thank staff also for putting this together for all of us. I'd just like to say that I support this measure for affordability. It's going to give more people more access to our city, people from a variety of different income levels. By offering these bonuses, Boise will help bring developers along in its goals of enforcing and bringing about its principles for a city for everyone through affordability. Another one of the goals the city has is movement for everyone. They'll be able to at least tip the needle a little bit on this through development that supports transit. The bonuses that are being given out for this are really good principles of city development in general. Increased density is good because it helps us utilize existing infrastructure investments and it increases overall walkability. Decreased parking helps to make Boise a place for more than just people who choose to drive a car, along with being a small step towards addressing Boise's climate impact. And finally, a more streamlined and faster development cycle helps us to address this housing affordability crisis in tangible ways today. This gives developers clear expectations on what to expect. Overall, this proposal is a good start in encouraging different types of affordable and transit-oriented development for people with different income levels. And it does so using incentives that are good urban practices that developers will find beneficial. The city of Boise only has so many ways to achieve affordable housing units. Like others have said, this is the carrot method, not the stick. Also, as others have said, there's no one silver bullet for this. This is an iterative process. This is not the end game. It will be interesting to see how utilized this program ends up being, and then more iterations can come. It'll also be interesting to have data from this go into the zoning code rewrite process as we work together to help handle similar questions in that larger endeavor. I'm excited to see how we can further iterate on this going forward. Personally, I would like to see this used for other zoning types, including R2 and even R1, but we can talk about that at a later date. So that's all I have to say. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Ostein. Elaine Kazikoff is next, and then Lori DeCare and Greg Caro-Bracey.
Thank you. My name's Elaine Kazikoff. I live at 2197 South Cross Creek Lane in 06. Thank you to city staff for the report and the hard work they've clearly been doing on a really important issue. And thanks to the commissioners for allowing this opportunity to speak. I know that this was introduced in October only because I follow Vanishing Boise on social media. And I know I'm in good company when I say it came out of nowhere to surprise me. I didn't see any clear connection to the 2018 process. I also want to say it feels to me like this process is being rushed through. And I have to ask, why are we rushing in a pandemic? We've got a serious pandemic in Idaho. We've got an economic downturn that really isn't showing up yet, maybe for the people of Idaho, but it's there. So I do agree with Vanishing Boise's assertion that in their comments that they submitted to the commissioners, that Boise is a tale of two cities when it comes to distribution of income. When I see what this ordinance considers affordable housing, I'm pretty disappointed. It seems like the city is out of touch with what the essential workers of this city are making, if those essential workers are lucky enough to still have a job. So I really do think that the commissioners should consider following Vanishing Boise's recommendation to adjust the income levels based on AMI to 60% of AMI, as many have said, and possibly even 50. I think we might seriously start talking about affordability then. I also agree with the Vista Neighborhood Association's assertion that this housing bonus ordinance probably puts existing affordable housing, such as mobile home parks, at risk. The city should be working to protect the affordable housing stock it has, not encourage the building of complexes that will offer only a token number of so-called affordable units. So in summary, let's do the following. Let's slow the process down. With the pandemic making the poor poorer and the wealthy wealthier, do we need these incentives now? Seems like passing this opens a window that will encourage a rush to develop before the rezoning process is completed. Give the public more opportunities for input. Take a closer look at the income levels being used. Again, back to using that 60% of AMI, and protect affordable housing stock. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, Ms. Kazikoff. Up next, I think it's, oh, sorry, Lori DeCare.
Can you hear me?
We can, yes.
Okay, Lori DeCare, 7154 West State Street, number 148. The goal to provide housing affordable for everyone will not be met. The 80% threshold is meaningless because developers will simply do what is most lucrative and build at 100% AMI, which is already market rate. Make no mistake, this will build no affordable units for anyone. We are calling housing for people making $74,000 a year as affordable, taking away 100% option and only having 80% so that it will at least do something.
Lori, Ms. DeCare,
The difference between affordable housing as a real estate term of art and a house I can afford is significant. The city's definition of quote unquote affordable housing is far beyond the grasp of the city's lower income communities who are far less than the minimum incomes necessary to qualify for unit under this plan. A portion of the population that reach income thresholds of 52,007.
We're doing it.
Okay.
Or David's calling her.
Ms. DeCare, we apologize. Your connection was quite bad. So we're going to see if we can connect with you over the phone.
So let's go to the,
yep.
Sorry, Mr. Chair.
So we're going to go ahead and move along. We have only a couple more folks. We'll go ahead and move to Greg Carabrisi while Lori gets her tech figured out here.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can, yes.
Perfect. I'm actually, I am Greg Carabrese. I live at 3360 West Forsythia Drive, 83703. I'm actually calling about the rezone request at a particular project on 3435 North 33rd Street, Boise, which obviously encompasses this rezone ordinance. Is that something I can speak to specific project?
We're going to get to that here in a little bit. This is for comment specific to this zoning amendment, this ordinance amendment.
Okay. Sorry, this is new to me, so I will pass and wait for further direction.
Okay, that sounds good. Thank you very much. And then I think we only have one more hand up, and that's April Moore, Low Income Housing Hoy.
And we'll try for Lori again.
Yeah, of course. Yep.
Go April. Oh, there she is.
Hi, is my audio coming through clearly?
We can hear you, yeah.
Cool. Well, hello. My name is April Hoy, and I live at 5212 West Kootenai Street. I'm here tonight to speak against this proposal in its current form. This proposal would pardon me. Housing affordability is far and away the most important housing issue currently facing Boise. The city needs to take advantage of every opportunity to force concessions from housing profiteers to get housing built that's affordable to the poorest Boiseans. This proposal would trade away the city's bargaining power for a pittance of units affordable only to middle-income Boiseans. It would do so in a way that incentivizes the destruction of existing affordable housing. Please modify this proposal in a way that forces developers to include a substantial amount of units that are affordable even to the poorest Boiseans, or please abandon this proposal. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hoy. So I see staff. I still see we have Lori on. Have we heard from her?
Mr. Chairman, Saline.
No.
Saline, do you want her to call in, or is anything happening that you want to happen?
Mr. Chair, Commissioners, we are sending her the dial-in information.
I'm
via
still on. Can you hear me?
Yay,
yeah, it's much better. Much better.
Okay. I've got the video off, so that should help. So I'll get going. I don't know if there's a particular place I should start, or should I just start over?
Why don't you just go ahead and start over because you were quite jumbled.
Okay. The goal to produce housing affordable for everyone will not be met. The 80% threshold is meaningless because developers will simply do what is most lucrative and build at 100% AMI, which is already market rate. Make no mistake, this will build no affordable units for anyone. We are calling housing for people making $74,000 a year affordable. Taking away the 100% option and only having 80% so that at least it would do something is an option. The difference between affordable housing as a real estate term of art and a house I can afford is significant. The city's definition of affordable housing is far beyond across the city's and communities who earn far less than the minimum incomes necessary to qualify for a unit under this plan. The portion of the population that reach income threshold of $52,000 and $74,000 and can pony up to $1,870 a month for these new quote-unquote affordable apartments does not help those most in need of housing. Those defined as low income and extremely low income people via HUD, aka those most precariously housed. Their growing ranks could never for the shiny
Lori,
that will replace the buildings where they used to live.
can you try to call in, please?
The income levels the city is using is 50% higher than those used for most.
Mr. Chair, I'm just going to have to mute her.
Yeah, I think that's fine. We just need to see if we can get her on the phone.
Why don't we, Mr. Chairman, since we have to anyway,
Take a little,
why don't we take another break?
take a little 5 minutes.
Too much tea.
I agree.
There we go.
We'll take a 5-minute break. We'll see if we can get Lori on the phone. And everybody take a little breather here. We'll be back just right after 9.
How you doing? Did you get some snacks? You can take one of mine. You like some cashews?
We're gonna be probably close to 9:30, right? Well, the tech was pretty good tonight so far.
Tech was good.
The tech was good.
I think so.
Okay. We got.
I'm going to put you up to the speaker to see if we have any feedback since we're during break. So just say something.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can.
Yep, but it sounds like there's an echo on your end.
So she should go off speakerphone.
Yeah, or mute.
Sorry. Let me turn my thing on. You're right, it's my bad. Okay, how about now?
I'm going to mute you on Zoom.
I want to make sure we have Commissioners Squire and Blanchard back with
Okay,
us.
try saying something again.
How is it now?
That's pretty
Good.
good.
It's pretty good.
Okay, I think we're going to do it. So we're just going to wait for a few more commissioners.
Okay, there he is.
And we got him.
Okay. All right, are we
Okay.
ready,
3
commissioners?
minutes.
3 minutes, Mr. Care.
Okay, go for it, Larry, or Lori, sorry.
Larry.
Go, Larry.
Okay. The goal to provide housing affordable for everyone will not be met. The 80% threshold is meaningless because developers will simply do what is most lucrative and build at 100% AMI, which is already market rate. Make no mistake, this will build no affordable units for anyone. We are calling housing for people making $74,000 a year as affordable. Take away the 100% option and do 60 and 80%. So at least it would do something. The difference between affordable housing is a real estate term of art and a house I can afford is significant. The city's definition of affordable housing is far beyond the grasp of the city's lower income communities who earn far less than the minimum incomes necessary to qualify for a unit under this plan. The portion of the population that reach income thresholds of $52,000 or $74,000 and can pony up $1,870 a month for these new quote unquote affordable apartments does not help those most in need of housing, those defined as low income and extremely low income people, and those most precariously housed. Their growing ranks could never afford the shiny new construction apartments that will replace the buildings where they used to live. The income levels the city is using are 50% higher than those used for most affordable housing programs. Boise's AMI has been driven up significantly in the last 2 years, both by the displacement of poor people coupled with wealthy in-migrants bringing out-of-state wages or equity from home sales and higher price markets. It further untethers the cost of housing from local wages. Boise is a tale of two cities with bimodal distribution of incomes, locals living on Idaho wages making $35,000 and a more well-heeled people making $100,000. The high-income demographic is already well served by the development industry's constant production of market-rate apartments and single-family homes. This targeted upzone puts lower-income neighborhoods in the crosshairs where the bulk of our naturally affordable housing currently exists, and where people are already experiencing the economic violence of gentrification and displacement. The city is advancing this proposal without performing one vulnerable community impact study or engaging even one neighborhood, and only using marketing and branding language that supports their predetermined outcome, brushing aside critical economic infrastructure, civil rights, and human issues. There's no reason for the city to be engaged in planned gentrification. The market is doing that on its own. The entire city is already attracted to investors. If Boise is going to use its leverage, it should be for the housing that the market is not otherwise producing for those at 60% AMI and below. We're asking the city to go back to the drawing board and start over since there has been no public engagement. The city needs to create an inclusive process that incorporates and doesn't just inform non-industry stakeholders, tenants unions, neighborhood associations, affordable housing providers, social service providers, and
Okay,
BPOT groups.
thank you, Ms.
It was
DeCare.
introduced in early October, and the council is
That
trying
is
to
your
get
time.
it passed in less than 4 months during a pandemic. The city should engage vulnerable communities.
Lori, can you,
and
Lori, can you please
especially
wrap it up?
communities of color. I have one final sentence. Simply unleashing the forces of the market by promoting more density through upzoning will lead to only more displacement, higher housing costs, more inequality, and human suffering in our community. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Lori. Okay. We have no more hands raised and no one else here in person. So we are going to return to staff for rebuttal.
Good evening, commissioners. Andrea Tuning for the record. I do want to bring up a couple of points. The really key points is first and foremost is we are proposing affordable housing, not low income housing, that we are trying to address an affordability factor. We're also looking at area median income. And so when you determine what that is, that means 50% of our population makes more than that amount and 50% makes less than that amount. So that is a key item to keep in mind as well. And we're also looking at all of those essential workers and that workforce housing. And workforce housing really is 80% of AMI all the way up to 120%. So we are really focusing on that workforce housing to keep people employed that are our essential employees. We also need to take into account that this isn't specific to affordable housing either. We do have a couple of different facets that it includes. This is a new view in regard to adaptive reuse and something that the city has never seen before. And we are also taking a look at activity centers to really bring people to have their homes located near goods, services, and employment centers. This is key for us to reduce vehicle trips traveled and to get vehicles off the road and encourage pedestrian and walkability. So I think all of those are key components that we need to take into account. I do want to remind you that you do have the ability to recommend approval to the City Council as they move forward. You can recommend denial, or if you've heard testimony this evening that would also cause you to suggest modifications to the City Council, you can certainly recommend those as well. So I just want to be available for any questions that you might have. I think those are my key components that I think that should be considered. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Andrea. Okay, with that, the public hearing is closed and we will bring this back before the commission to render a decision. Do I have a motion? She's thinking about it.
Mr. Chair.
Commissioner Blanchard.
Well, I will just start us off by saying I would move that we would approve this motion as written with the technical corrections submitted by Commissioner Gillespie.
Very good. I have a motion. Do I have a second? I have a motion and a second. Motion from Commissioner Blanchard and a second from Commissioner Gillespie. Any discussion?
Mr. Chair.
Commissioner Blanchard.
As I made the motion, I will give my rationale for this. So I want to first say thanks to Andrea and Leon. This is a really fantastic job of staff work on this. A lot of us have been kicking around this work for quite some time. I started my planning career, I don't know, 16 or so years ago as an intern actually in PDS, and started going through this stuff. And then, I don't know, 15 or so years ago, went to work as staff at the council, and I've been out and about doing other things since then, as most of you know. But by day now, I am a developer of affordable housing. And so all of these things resonate quite well. Let me just try to get a couple of things out there. As earlier stated, this has a very limited objective here. And those 6 goals that I asked Andrea and Leon about are really what this policy is all about. There is absolutely no doubt that the greatest need out there is to find some way to help people who are at 30% to 50% AMI. This does not do that and is not intended to do that. That is a much more challenging question and a very, very difficult thing to implement. And I know city staff is already working on that, and I know the mayor's committed to that, as is council. But for right now, what we can do is try to get some housing starts more quickly at market rate. And that's something we can easily do. And that's something that this proposal can potentially impact. In the 15 years or so that I've been kicking around doing this, a lot of you guys have been here longer. Milt's been on this commission for 8 or 9 years, so he's can probably second this. But a lot of times when these kind of proposals come before council or P&Z, we tend to hear a lot of the same things, that this is an overarching policy. It's a huge rewrite. It's a huge transformation. There just wasn't time for citizens to participate, and that somehow there's like this cabal of developers that we're always talking to who are telling the commission and council and the staff how to think. And it just doesn't happen like that. I can't ever think of a time when I actually met with a developer out there and said, hey, you know what you ought to do while you've got your commissioner hat on. It just doesn't happen like that. So I just want to address those things there really quickly. And again, just reiterate that this is a very, very sensible and moderate rewrite. And for all the people who spend a lot of time, I know Lori DeCare, and I know April Hoy, who's an old colleague of mine at Boise State. These people spend a lot of their time looking at this issue, and I empathize with them, and I'm with them 100% on this as far as needing to provide affordable housing. But let me tell you, there are much more serious tools coming down the pike that we see all over the country. In part of my day job, I keep our leadership abreast on zoning changes that are happening throughout the country as it affects our business. And if you think this is overarching or a huge rewrite or a huge transformation, you need to be aware of what other cities are doing around the country. For example, Olympia, Washington just got rid of R zoning altogether. So if it's R zone, you can put whatever you want on it. There's no more residential single family zoning, it's gone. Most of California is doing the same thing. Atlanta's looking at the same thing. The boroughs in New York are up zoning. It's occurring all over the place. So this is comparatively with what we're working with here tonight, this is a very, very mild policy which could potentially help us get some more housing starts more quickly. And that's all it is, and that's all it's designed to be. And there is very little, frankly, that I think could possibly be damaging in neighborhoods. Or, frankly, I don't know how many more housing starts this will get us, but certainly I know staff will be tracking this should this policy go through. So that's just kind of the way I've been thinking through that. Legal asked me to make a quick technical correction too. Richard Llewellyn had mentioned the prospect of a 6-story building being dropped down next to a single family residence. And I don't know that we can build anything of 6 stories that would be 60 feet tall. And I think that can only occur in C5 if I'm wrong, but I don't want specters out there that aren't realistic influencing this decision. So that's kind of the way I thought through this thing. And I hope that's helpful.
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner Blanchard. Commissioner Gillespie.
So Chris, just let me make sure that we get it on the record. So I think the technical corrections you were speaking of were to add which kinds of permits to section C, which is the section that says these entitlements can't be changed. And that was the whole discussion of rezones and development agreements and all that stuff. I think the other one was just that confusing language, and Marcia Franklin also talked about it, where if you were both a AHS and a ACS, the plain language says 50, but I think Andrea, so this is on packet page 68. So sections 3IB, the R3 is the streamline number is still 25. So I think, Chris, those were those two things that you were talking about. Is that right?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Gillespie, I was referring to the technical corrections that perhaps staff brought up where there was a difference in language between transit-oriented and what's the verbiage, community centers?
Yeah, page 15 and page 31, the activity center language is incorrect.
That is what I was referring to, but I would accept, as the maker of the motion, I would accept your friendly amendments.
Well, so Mr. Chairman, before we do that, one thing, guys, we can do is we're all going to have different things we'd like council to consider. So I'm not sure, and I'd just like to ask the group, do we really need to micro edit this, or should we either approve it or deny it, but then each of us can make our own sort of recommendations, because then council, whatever we do, they're going to read through it. So I'm just wondering what the most, and I direct this to Saline too, for us to sit here and write code is always a challenge.
Mm-hmm.
So how do we want to sort of proceed?
I'll sound off, Commissioner Gillespie, because I had another comment on a similar vein. In general, I'm in favor of the motion. I would like to get everyone else's thoughts, in particular regarding the notifications and the radius, because I think there was some fair comments regarding concern over the streamlined process. So I'm not sure we need to amend the motion, but I think that it merits at least some discussion, because I would like to entertain a way to perhaps correct or improve that process of notifications. I think it's a fair request to at least keep the part of the radius notifications in place, so that homeowners within that radius are notified of projects, even if it is an administrative review.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Bradnover.
Yeah, I agree 100% with what you're saying there, Mr. Chairman. When I saw this I was very excited because, as you guys probably guessed, I'm a champion for affordable housing here in Boise. And with Ms. Tuning's clarification in the rebuttal, it was good for us all to kind of pause for a moment and recognize that this is fairly tightly scoped. And in that context, does a pretty good job. But frankly, it's going to be a journey of discovery. And there's a code rewrite coming up not too long, which can help amend some of the areas where maybe we got unexpected results. However, the one thing I think that really works against this code piece is the streamlined administrative review. We are dealing with a time where government is mistrusted, and in some cases deservedly so. And we hear people saying, I would like to have my voice heard. And part of the function of this Planning and Zoning Commission is to provide a place where people's voices are heard. And so to take something as important as this with high density housing projects and not give people, potentially not give people the chance to discuss it and get in front of it is a big mistake that will haunt us in the future. Yeah, as one of those folks mentioned, democracy is messy. We have some long meetings here, and let that continue, please. I would recommend that we strike the streamlined, or we recommend striking that when we put it to the council.
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Jim. Milt, yeah.
So I think Jim is on to a really interesting idea, which is what's the real value of this streamlined procedure, period. And then, you know, there's intermediate ground. So far extreme, we just strike it and recommend striking it. So there is no streamlined procedure, period. The other thing we could do is strike it from any R zone so that it doesn't apply in an R3, but the streamlined procedure is still available in the C's and the LO zones and the PC zone. And if we do that, we can then require for those zones that the notification be the, you know, the heavy duty full strength notification. So I'm trying to see, Jim, what do you think about that as kind of a middle ground? Because I share with you a concern about the whole, because the whole streamline issue to me is problematic.
Mr. Chairman, to respond to Commissioner Gillespie. So I agree. However, I have to go back to your prior comments about writing code in the commission meetings. And so I would say, well, let's definitely put it out there that this is something where we question the usefulness of it and suggest that there are alternatives about how it's applied, but stop short of being overly prescriptive in terms of how we see it. I think you hit on the key point is this, of all the things in there, there's some great incentives, okay? This is not one of them. This doesn't provide value to enhance the development of this kind of housing.
Thanks, Jim. I think I'm going to ask Commissioners Squires and Moore for any thoughts on the matter, and then we'll circle back to Commissioner Blanchard, who made the original motion. Okay.
Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Squires.
You know, I started my career as an AmeriCorps Vista in specializing in rural housing for low-income individuals. So this is near and dear to my heart. And I spent a lot of time this weekend trying to research and trying to understand, and, you know, should we recommend going down to 60% and just really having this internal struggle. I appreciate staff and Commissioner Blanchard kind of bringing this back to here's what this ordinance is trying to do, and it is narrowly scoped. So for me, the biggest issue is the administrative process. And I am spot on with Commissioner Gillespie and Commissioner Brattenober that I think most certainly it needs to stay in place for the residential zoning. And so I think that is certainly, I would support it for all zones, but I think if we have to have just one, absolutely that one. The only other thing that I would say in terms of a potential recommendation to the city council is I'd like to see the R2 zone.
added back in. I think that's important as well. I understand why it was taken out. And I get that this is just a trial and that, everything will be re-reviewed with the new zoning ordinance, but I do think that that is something to be considered as well. And thank you for asking for my comments.
Mr. Chair.
Commissioner Moore?
So in terms of public comment, that was my biggest issue with this is just lack of notification, public comment. And I think exactly hitting on the head with that. And I agree with not writing code at DICE or virtual DICE. I think if we feel that that element doesn't meet the intent of public convenience and general welfare, is it worth recommending now for the whole motion? Do we make a recommendation to City Council that they relook at this? Can we have the city kind of relook at it and come back with a different plan in terms of public notification? But in terms of writing the code in the meeting is something that I would like to avoid personally.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Moore. Chris, we'll bring it back to you. Commissioner Blanchard. We have a motion with some amendments. Would you like to take a stab at updating that motion or any other further comments?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Here's, I guess, just a couple more things. I very much appreciate the input from the rest of the commissioners who are probably infinitely better at this than I am. Nonetheless, I want to try to broaden the perspective here for a second and go back to the goals that staff brought to us with this ordinance really quickly and just put this out there. Because where I think we are in the process is that we've passed a comprehensive plan, and now we are tasked, and council is tasked with moving the goals of the comprehensive plan forward. And so one of the explicit goals of this policy was, quoting from the staff report, to simplify the regulations and development review process. So that is not something extraneous to this debate, but at the very core of it. So is that getting that streamlined policy process in place is really what this is about. That said, I think that there is enough testimony from all the commissioners and certainly from the public on other people's weariness of streamlining this process. And I think I would, again, with the input of commissioners saying how all of us are loath to write code from the dais, that I would just propose that the original motion stand. I think there's enough guidance for council to take it up, and frankly, I think it's important that council do take it up and make their legislative intent known as the legislative body. Are there concerns among council with this streamlining process, or is this very intentional, as it says in the comp plan and as staff pointed out in goals for this ordinance? So my reading of it is that this is a very intentional piece of this. But I think, again, all that said, I think it's worthwhile to leave it to council, get their legislative intent on it, and let them take all of the public and our suggestions to bear.
Very good. Very good. Milt, as a seconder, any other discussion on the matter?
Mr. Chairman, no, I mean, I think that Saline, you can nod if you think there's enough on the record for them to chew over. She says, yeah. I do want to address one other issue that came up, and this is the argument that we shouldn't do this because we don't have adequate public transportation. This is an old argument. I've had it for the whole time we've been here. Some specific comments were made about the state street plan, et cetera. The city will argue, and I agree though, that the transit, the only way it's going to happen is to follow the density. So I do believe that we should go ahead and do something like this now, because I know for certain that if we don't increase the density, we'll never get mass transit, and that this is the only way. It's not a certain way, but it's the only way, because the alternative is we spread out like Vegas or Phoenix or Salt Lake City, and then you just can't do it because it's just too expensive per mile. So that's my argument, because that's going to come up again too at the city council. Thank you.
Thanks, Milt.
Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Bratnover.
So obviously I am strongly biased toward eliminating the streamlined approval process. But the alternative is turning down the law. I'm even less in favor of that. However, that said, I want to, and Celine, with all due respect to you, that we've pontificated enough on this. This is my last shot at it, so what the heck. I believe that there is, number one, the potential for abuse of the streamlined process. That's what you're hearing in testimony of both commissioners and the public. And even when it's not abused, there will be the appearance of abuse. That's just the way these things go. So this message is for the city council. It would be highly unwise to leave that in there. I recognize that it's one of the key points of this, but I don't believe it gets us any closer to the goal of affordable housing, whether it's in there or not. And just a couple more points that I wanted to add. I believe that the elimination of the R1 and R2, I agree with, I believe it was Commissioner Squires, at least on the R2, but also the R1. That can be a slippery slope towards segregation of the low income, of the affordable housing and potentially low income housing choices. We've seen that happen in other cities. And so to avoid gentrification, whatever you want to call it, they should take a hard look at it, including all the R zones. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner Bratnover.
Mr. Chair.
Commissioner Moore.
I have a few more items besides the topic of public notification, which just to reiterate, I'm reluctantly in support of this. I think there's so many good merits to this, but I do have issues with the lack of public notification and public hearings. I think there's a better solution, and I'm excited to see what City Council comes up with. Besides that item, I am encouraged by the adaptive reuse incentive. It's exciting to see things like that starting to come online. And I'm hopeful that maybe a higher demand for development along those activity centers will help bring in more public transportation and add in some more demand for some of that public transportation a little bit sooner. So I'm excited to see how this evolves and hopeful that that public hearing process will develop a little bit more.
Thank you, Commissioner Moore. Commissioner Squires, any other final thoughts, comments?
I think it's all been said, and would call for the vote.
Very good. Okay. Yeah, just real quick, I want to thank everyone that testified this evening. I appreciate the process this evening. Everyone was succinct in their comments, and we had, I think, a pretty good, robust array of comments on this topic. And it's a complex issue, and everyone has different ideas. And my personal opinion is that, while this is maybe not the end all be all, it's a good step in the right direction. And I actually think the timing of it is quite good, given the fact that we have the zoning ordinance revisions upcoming, right? So this is a chance to give this a try, for a year or two and see how it can be amended and improved as we move further down the road. So having said that, we have a motion to approve from Commissioner Blanchard and a second from Commissioner Gillespie. I believe that motion included corrections to text on pages 15 and 31 per Andrea's comments during staff's report. Is that correct, Chris?
Mr. Chair, correct.
Okay, very good. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and call the vote.
Schaefer,
Aye.
Squires,
Aye.
Blanchard,
Aye.
Moore,
Aye.
Gillespie,
Aye.
Ratnober.
Aye.
All in favor, motion carries.
Okay, thank you, everyone.
Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Gillespie.
It is 9:34.
Mhm.
Pursuant to both city code, I would suggest that the hour is now late, especially for those of us down here at freezing cold City Hall, and that we, per code, we defer the rest of our agenda to our next regularly scheduled meeting. So,
So moved.
I move that we, for lateness of hour, defer to our next regularly scheduled meetings, all the remaining items.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Gillespie, I just want to ask a few questions for clarification. Are you saying all of the other items tonight, or did you want to attempt to hear one of them?
We have, I think it's a very, thank you, staff. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 items remaining on the agenda. And I believe at our next meeting, we already have a handful of items, correct?
That's
Celine?
correct. We do have things scheduled out for January 4th, but we do not have a second hearing scheduled in January. So I would recommend that whatever does get deferred tonight would go to the January 11th hearing.
Well,
what is Commissioner Gillespie's pleasure? We have a motion.
There's a whole gang on here.
Let's take we can take the pulse of the group.
Yeah, I mean, I would defer what's left, adjourn the meeting, and then we'll hit these guys on the second meeting in January. That would be my preference, but I'm okay, but I'm only good for one more. And by the way, at the bottom of our agenda, it says it's the discretion of the commission to not begin new business after 9:30. So we're pretty clearly, inside the guardrails of the procedure here.
Yeah, and to that point, we did make a point at the beginning of the meeting. This was going to be a long one, and that was especially the items that were later on the agenda were certainly a risk of deferral. So I think we're getting nods from the commission that a deferral of all remaining items to January 11th is the desire.
Is it January 11th the right date?
I believe it is. Is that right, Steph?
Big boss, is it the right date?
Now you're making me double check. Yes, January 11th is the correct date.
Okay, so I make that motion.
We have a motion to defer our remaining items to January 11th. Do we have a second to that motion?
Second.
Motion and a second from Commissioner Squires. Any other discussion?
I'd just like to make sure with Mary, if she's online, that we're in good stead with her.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Gillespie, yes, I think this is an adequate motion and would be happy to support it.
Thank you, Mary. Okay, with that, we're going to go ahead and call the vote.
Schaefer,
Aye.
Squires,
Aye.
Blanchard,
Aye.
Moore,
Aye.
Gillespie,
Aye.
Ratnober.
Aye.
All in favor, motion carries.
Before we go this evening, I just wanted to wish.
Oh.
Yeah.
I was going to request a point of personal privilege, if I may.
Do we want, let's go ahead and start with Commissioner Bratnober.
Okay. Okay. Well, first of all, since this is my last meeting as commissioner, I'd like to say a couple words of farewell. While I'm very disappointed that my commission wasn't renewed, I understand the politics involved in these appointments. I've been truly blessed to work on the Boise City Planning and Zoning Commission with such talented people, even for this short time. I want to thank former Mayor Dave Beater for giving me this opportunity. The commissioners who pour over analyses and public testimony, the dedicated and professional staff who run the show, and the concerned citizens who testify and share their vision for our city are all working to make Boise a great place to live. I've looked forward to each and every meeting. They allow citizens and government to interact directly and make life a little better for all of us. Everyone gets to speak for their 3 minutes. Volunteer commissioners listen and make judgments based on facts and testimony. While my judgments sometimes ran against the grain of the commission, I've always kept in mind that the lives of real people are impacted when making my calls. Thanks again for all the work and camaraderie. I wish you all the best.
Well said, Jim.
Thank you.
Any other thoughts for Jim?
Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Gillespie.
Well, Jim, I'm really going to miss you, and we just wish you well. I just thank you so much for all your service to the city and the state and all, you know, all you've done. And gosh, that's all I got. See you later, buddy.
Thanks, Mel.
Very good. Very good.
Mr. Chair,
Commissioner Moore.
I'd just like to echo that. I mean, I've only been on here for a couple of months, but I've really appreciated your perspective, outlook on things, and all your comments and questions. I think have been really helpful. And as I've kind of gotten used to commissioning and to learning, and yeah, it's been really great, and all the best.
Thank you. Thank you. And thanks for the great card you guys gave me and the photo. Those were delightful. Thank you.
Commissioner Squires is unmuted, so is there a comment or thought?
I was just going to say, it's been weird being appointed in this time of COVID and not having sat in a meeting room with all of you since March with my appointment. But Commissioner Bratnober, I just always have appreciated just you speaking your truth. We've been in alignment together a couple of times, I think, by ourselves. And I'm just really disappointed that you're not going to continue on the commission. And I really do truly hope that our paths cross. I meant that when I wrote it. And I just thank you for your service.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Commissioner Blanchard.
Thank you. Jim, it's really been a privilege serving with you over Zoom. I can't believe it's actually Commissioner Moore. I think it's been almost a year now, although I don't know if we started having meetings until March, but Jim, I really appreciate your empathetic approach toward this thing. I think empathy is a very difficult thing in the best of circumstances for people. And it's certainly, it didn't pop up on my top 5 strengths when I did Strengths Finder. And so you were always that great reminder for me when we do these public meetings that that empathy really is key. And that was really what I learned from you in the last year working with you. And so I really appreciate that, the spirit that you brought, I'm very grateful for that.
Thank you.
Yep, Jim, yeah, all the best in your next endeavors. We'll miss you here on the commission. It's been, I can't believe it's already been, I think, 2 years since we've been serving together. And It's amazing how time has flown. And I have always appreciated your thoughts. And I agree with Commissioner Blanchard, your empathy, I think, is second to none. So we're going to miss your input in 2021 and beyond. So again, all the best. And with that, this is our last meeting in 2020. Here's looking forward to a happy 2021 and happy holidays to everyone. And please take care. And with that, we are adjourned.
Take care, guys.
Bye, everybody.
Jim, we hope we see you at testimony eventually.
Be careful what you wish for.
I bet.